Okay, well, good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to the opening session of the Water, Energy, Food, Ecosystems Nexus Science Advances Conference. My name is Stephen Quest. I'm the Director General of the Joint Research Centre. I'm very happy to be with you this morning. So Nexus is the Latin word for connection, something that binds or brings together. So Nexus is an existing connection, for example, between a severe drought, its impact on food security, the risk of wildfires, increasing poverty, compromised health. And to cope with droughts, investments in a specific sector might need to be planned in the context of intertwined adaptive measures, such as resilient water distribution infrastructure or cultivation of drought and fire-tolerant crops, smart energy grids which might accommodate renewable sources. So cross-sector planning and investing would then result in economic growth, maximizing the social and the economic benefits and improving health by preventing diseases and epidemics. So this nexus concept parallels the multicentric point of view of the Sustainable Development Goals, where we see each goal impacting the progression of the other Sustainable Development Goals. And interconnectedness of the Mediterranean countries is undeniable. We have youth unemployment and education, poverty and migration flows, climate change, food security, water scarcity, pollution of the seas, overfishing. These are just a few examples of areas where regional cooperation is necessary. And so the key concept of this conference is addressing interdependencies. The water, energy, food ecosystem nexus is a cross-sectoral perspective that requires response options going beyond traditional sectoral approaches. But at present, interdependency is insufficiently mainstreamed within policies. And more often than not, governments and international organizations tend to deal with water or energy, agriculture, environment in different departments. And while there are considerable overlaps, they often define and implement policies for each sector separately. And this weakness tends to impede the development and implementation of policies that are really fit effectively to tackle the challenges that the Mediterranean region faces. And this is why the European Commission's Joint Research Centre has decided to focus on the water, energy, food and ecosystem nexus, because we want to join the dots together and to help policymakers and stakeholders to design governance strategies that bring different and often competing water-dependent sectors to make the best of available resources. And in addressing this strong nexus between water and climate and energy and food, it's essential, we believe, to achieve the objectives of the European Green Deal, because water there is a key element in so many of the actions that we need to take to boost the efficient use of resources, to cut pollution, to provide a fair and healthy and environmentally friendly food system. A climate, water, energy, food nexus will therefore help to address these interlinked challenges by exploiting available synergies across all of the policy areas of the European Green Deal. We're also convinced that stakeholder engagement is a key driver to strengthen the Nexus narrative. And this is one of the reasons why the Union for the Mediterranean, PRIMA, the Cyprus Institute and the European Commission have partnered in the organization of this conference. While we all tend to agree on the beauty of solutions with distant targets, the acceptance of short-term actions is more difficult, which often limits the transition that we need to make from Nexus thinking to Nexus action. And I'm convinced that learning from best practices and providing evidence-based assessments on the benefits and on the trade-offs of a Nexus approach can really help convince policymakers and other actors to adapt their thinking and behavior. So thanks to this conference, we expect to discuss and hopefully agree on workable measures on how to integrate the novel paths in the research and planning of water, energy, food ecosystem supply chains through this collaborative response across the Mediterranean region. And I'm therefore delighted to invite members of the opening panel to share with us their views on the water, energy, food ecosystem nexus in the Mediterranean context. And our panel members are Kostas Kadis, the Minister of Agriculture, Rural Development and Environment of Cyprus. Unfortunately, the Minister couldn't be with us personally today, but he sent a video message, and we'll come to that in just a second. We were hoping to have Yasmin Fouad, Minister of Environment of the Arab Republic of Egypt, but unfortunately, at the last minute, she's unable to be with us today. We have Nasser Kamel, the Ambassador, Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean. We have my colleague, Jean-Eric Paquet, Director General for the DG for Research and Innovation in the European Commission. And we have Clelia Vassiliou, the Commissioner for the Environment of the Republic of Cyprus. And so I'd now like to turn to the video message of Kostas Kadis, Minister for Agriculture, Rural Development and Environment of Cyprus.
Dear colleagues and friends, it is with great pleasure that I am addressing this conference today. The 2030 Agenda with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change highlight the need for policy integration and coherence. This need is reflected in the European Union's Green Deal, which guides us to rethink our policies for energy, industry, production and consumption, food and agriculture. The transition towards a circular economy must be accelerated. A circular economy which recognizes waste as a resource, keeps consumption within the boundaries of our planet, and increases the value placed on protecting and restoring our natural ecosystems. Integration in all policies and across all sectors is a fundamental aspect in all our endeavors to meet our commonly agreed commitments. This necessarily requires realigning policy and decision-making process and significantly strengthening cooperation and coordination between the economy, trade, society, and our environment. The Nexus concept has the potential to provide a holistic approach in addressing the energy, water, and food security in an integrated manner, which recognizes that healthy ecosystems are important for ensuring the sustainability of development solutions. It provides an innovative framework that incorporates the interrelationships, synergies, and trade-offs between water, energy, food, and ecosystem resources and services, and ultimately addressing the effects of climate change. Dear friends, dear colleagues, the future is in our hands. Let's make it sustainable for the generations to come. Thank you.
So many thanks, Minister, for the video address. And now it's a pleasure to turn to His Excellency Ambassador Nasser Kamel, Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And, I was listening very carefully to your introduction, which really, in a sense, give us the way or the direction of travel we should be pursuing. Dear ministers, dear Director General, ladies and gentlemen, I take this opportunity, of course, to thank you for having me take part in this very essential discussion. As we all know, there is dire warnings that has been expressed and issued in the last years regarding fresh water availability in our region. Our region is already one of the most water scarce regions in the world. We all know that approximately 180 million of about 420 million Mediterranean people only have 1,000 square meters of water per year, which is considered borderline water. More than 20 million Mediterranean people, mainly in the rural area, have actually no access to improved water resource and sanitation services. If we add to that the COVID-19 crisis, which had added an extra layer of complexity to the existing water challenges, the impact of the crisis was felt differently by the Mediterranean countries based on their economic capacity, governance structure, and of course, demographic characteristics. So as we move to the aftermath of the pandemic, we need to be proactive while facing the many challenges of water security and environmental challenges, or I dare say, our climate crisis. I must highlight that this is not something new for us here at Union for the Mediterranean. Our water agenda has been a very important priority since 2017, when we, and by we I mean our member states, endorsed the Ministerial Declaration of Water in Malta, calling for the development of a water agenda and, what's more important, a financial strategy to go along with. Because water finance is one of the most important fields where we have to do better in the next few years. The UFM water agenda did and has helped recognize early the need for a holistic approach to address water and climate challenges in our region, breaking down the silo approach of working separately on water and move towards thinking and acting across systems. This is exemplified by the UFM focus on the WEFE, Nexus, or what we call Water Employment Migration Nexus. So we have been working with our 42 member states to implement the water agenda I referred to, and also foster the exchange of best practices, notably on how to advance solutions to meet water-related socio-economic challenges, promoting climate resilience while assisting women and youth towards job creation. Acting more and faster towards sustainability in the Mediterranean region is urgent, yet the challenge of bringing about change is enormous. For that, we need, as I said before, a proactive approach that will gather together the idea of priorities, resilience, opportunities, adaptive solution, coherence, technology, innovation, vision, and early recovery. The Mediterranean region needs to move forward in all those areas if we hope to stand up to the challenge. And in that sense, the engagement of the international financing partners and the private sector in a combined approach is an essential step. As is prioritizing financial reforms to strengthen markets and institutions, coming back to the whole idea of water finance. Our efforts should also focus on youth engagement and participation in the regional and international arena by enabling their participation in dedicated activity and policy processes. The reinforcement of scientific cooperation in environmental sciences, given the potential regional impact climate change on the region, should be a priority. I should encourage student mobility as a vehicle for directing research towards common regional problems. All of those are of paramount importance. To wrap up, I can assure you of our engagement at the UFM to continue working towards the implementation of projects and initiatives that have a tangible impact on citizen lives. I wish for this conference all the success it deserves and an excellent conference for all the participants. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your inspiring words. Thank you for being with us today. It's now my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Jean-Eric Paquet, Director General for Research and Innovation in the European Commission. Jean-Eric, you're very welcome, and look forward to hearing your words on the WEFE Nexus concept. Over to you, please.
Stephen, thank you very much, Ambassador colleagues. Good morning, everyone. I mean, indeed, Stephen, in your introduction, I think you set it out very well, and Ambassador Kamel as well. We need to work across policy areas. We need to combine policy areas to find synergies in terms of interventions across these policy areas. And you noted it, Stephen, as well. I think that's sometimes an overlooked point when you work across policy areas, and that applies also to the Sustainable Development Goals. There are trade-offs as well in terms of intervention. So looking at a nexus approach or providing systemic solutions is the way forward in terms of policy making, and is of course in the Joint Research Center, in DG Research and Innovation in the Commission, very much the basis of our science and research endeavors. And I must say, I'm really pleased to say a few words at the opening of the conference, because it is organized with our Mediterranean partners. It's co-organized, I think, with PRIMA as well, the partnership of bringing together 19 Mediterranean countries. And PRIMA, in interaction with its stakeholders, those member states, but also the European Commission, is very much, as the ambassador said, very much focused on this systemic nexus approach, including with a call dedicated to it. And at the end of the conference, John Bell, a director here in DG Research and Innovation, also the Commission representative in PRIMA, will award the PRIMA Nexus Prize. So that's, I think, really going in the right direction. It is, of course, very much a policy process. We need indeed evidence base for that policy process. And this is therefore in the Commission, or at the Union level rather, very much part of the European Green Deal, anchored in the Sustainable Development Goals and aiming at bringing together our ambitious climate objectives 2030 and climate neutrality by 2050 together with the challenges faced by the Mediterranean very acutely, but beyond, on biodiversity loss and environmental and other forms of pollution. So we absolutely need to work across that nexus. It is very much also the logic of the work done under Horizon Europe, which is the latest European framework program. It has now kicked off at scale. Many of you are certainly preparing themselves as institutions or individual scientists to be a part of the rollout of Horizon Europe. And you will have seen that as we prepared the structure of the program, we had to deal with these questions of system solutions. We had to look at that nexus, and we didn't go quite as far as PRIMA was able to do, but we have structured the implementation of applied research, the second pillar of the program, if you want, in a number of clusters which really try to cut across policy areas. So in contrast to the previous framework program, Horizon 2020, which is now running the end of its course, we don't have a cluster on transport, we don't have a cluster on energy, we don't have a separate intervention cluster on climate, but we have combined those three areas, energy, mobility, and climate, in one cluster. And that cluster is working, in fact, hand in hand, really, with another cluster which combines environment, nature, agriculture, environment and water issues also in this systemic approach. So we are trying with that to support those institutions and policymakers which are moving towards these more systemic cross-cutting approaches, also with Horizon Europe. And I think that's certainly one of the added values of a European program, in that it allows to explore and implement innovative and systemic approaches. Let me conclude by coming back to what Stephen said at the outset. I think research is, of course, key, will provide knowledge to deal with the complexity of these systems approaches. I think that is certainly very, very necessary also in the food, water, energy nexus, which we are discussing today. It also provides solutions, both in terms of technologies cutting across, in terms of connecting technologies, which are sometimes sector-based. But I think what will probably be even more important is that research institutions are more and more connected within governments, and that this cross-cutting approach, which I think comes quite natural to many research institutions and scientists, which are very used to multidisciplinary thinking, that this approach then also impacts on the formulation of public policies. And whole of government approaches are certainly identified across the globe as desirable, but are in many cases challenging to put in place. We know that in the Commission, even if we are quite well structured to do that, and I think we are really, with Stephen and many colleagues in the Commission, making a real impact on driving EU policy design with our knowledge and solutions. And I think this is really how I would encourage you all as research institutions, universities and scientists to engage also with your administrations, so that the impact of your science really feeds into policy design and into solutions in society. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Well, thank you very much, Jean-Eric, for being with us and for sharing those thoughts and helping us to situate the work on the WEFE Nexus in the broader picture of Horizon Europe. It's now my pleasure to invite Clelia Vasiliou, the Commissioner for the Environment of the Republic of Cyprus, on stage to share her thoughts. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Good morning. To all of you, I would like to give my sincere congratulations for that conference. It is really crucial, and we are at a point of time that we take no delay. We are in a point where we realize now that we spent so many years in researching without turning the results into the field, to the local communities, and local communities, I believe, that are not that included in our efforts. And now is the time to blend, to create synergies between the academia, the people, and actually work in the field of environment, not just reading about it, not just regulating about it, but implementing on actual basis. And this is the time where we need to act. And I would like to congratulate you for that effort. We are now on this time where we need this holistic approach. As you clearly said at the start, we find many departments, many universities, many organizations trying their best, but it's all in it's partially made, and we need to coordinate our efforts into that aspect. And nature-based solutions, from my point of view, it's our way through. And of course, making sure that the locals in every effort are educated and involved all the way in the way they can understand. Because what I realize in every time we have a conference or we have a meeting, they might pretend that they understand, but maybe we use a language that doesn't come down to them. We need to change the way we talk with the people, and we need to make them realize the need to cooperate and enjoy the results, because we might be talking a language they cannot understand, so they are creating walls in order to resist because they do not understand. Maybe if we try now to explain in a more easier way or more understandable on what they live, because it is a really different way in approaching people living by the sea or people living up in the mountains. It's a totally different world, and we need to adjust in the terroir, not only of the land, not only of the use of the land, but for the people personalities as well. The food, the use of water, the way they react into decisions and policy making. We need to understand, and we need to start to feel more on what we need to do rather than regulating it and deciding what needs to be done. We need to go bottom-up approach, and find proper solutions that will actually make us feel that we're moving on towards nature-based solutions. Decisions and policies are not the same. Every ecosystem, every area, every system in every corner of the Mediterranean, it is different, but still the same. Mediterranean faces same threats, but there are different ecosystems, different people. We need to join forces at the same time that we need to have tailor-made solutions. I will not take more of your time. I want to believe that I made my point clear enough. Thank you for your time and all the best for the conference.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner Vassiliou, for your intervention and for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. It's now my pleasure to invite Giovanni De Santi. He's Director in the Joint Research Centre for Sustainable Resources, and really in charge of coordinating all of our work in-house on the WEFE Nexus. And Giovanni is going to present to us the gateway to the Mediterranean. So Giovanni, over to you, please.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning. Good morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. It's my personal pleasure, to be honest, to be part of this opening session for the very simple reason that I've been myself pushing a lot since more than 2 years to organize this conference. So I should express my thankfulness to all my colleagues which supported this idea, and then of course the contribution we received from other colleagues from RTD, so Research and Innovation, from PRIMA, from Union for Mediterranean, and the Cyprus Institute. So I think that all together we prepare a very nice event. We would have liked, of course, to organize in presence, but as you know, it was not possible. We kept on postponing because of pandemia, but at a certain moment we thought it was much more important to have it now rather than keep on postponing, because we never know the situation, how it will evolve. So first of all, thanks to all of you. I echo what the previous speaker said already. I fully agree that now cross-cutting issue, the interrelation, interlinks among different issues that are by nature connected is absolutely fundamental. And I think we do have now an opportunity. The European Green Deal asks and wants and pushes for this kind of integrated approach, integrated policy. So I do agree that in the past, many policies have been doing just like silos, policy for water, policy for energy, policy for agriculture and food. But now we understood that citizens want a sustainable solution, real issues. And the real issues, they said, are not via silos, they're connected. So if you do provide them good agricultural solutions, which do not take into account the real availability of water, or the real availability of energy, or the affordability of water and energy, it makes no sense. So finally, we are going towards this kind of new era of policies, which should be, of course, also underpinned by a new era of projects of research. And I want to also to thank also Commissioner Vassiliou for what she said. We also now shift from words, let me say, to real facts, to real projects. That's why we pointed out to start developing something concretely in the area of Mediterranean, which is a very critical area, because we know for different reasons, environmental, very critical situation, and again, desertification, climate change is not going possibly to help the situation, to improve the situation, politically, social, no? So I think that the Mare Nostrum is going to be a kind of pilot testing project for the rest of this kind of integrated approach. So I'm very happy and very honored to start proposing something which goes to matter and to tackle some serious issue like the availability to ensure food, water, and energy for all, however respecting the natural boundaries of our Mother Earth. So again, we will mix together from one side technology. Be careful, there are many new technology that now do exist. We can transform salty water into fresh water, and this is now competitive also from economic point of view to other resources. So we can alleviate, if not solve, the problem of availability of fresh water along the coast, maybe for more than 200 kilometers. We can capture wind and solar to create electricity, and of course we can also start to grow adapted crops now in this very solicited area, also in the desert. So there are many technology, but the technology should be linked, as also Steve said, to the citizen. We need to involve the citizen. We need to make them part of the decision process and to feel them also part of the solution. Otherwise, they will refuse it. So this event will also look at how to involve different parts of the society, especially the one more exposed to kind of poverty, to the kind of lack of water resources, so the kind of people that are poorest. So this kind of social, technology, and political triangle should come to again to share the knowledge. The knowledge should be open, transparent, and available to all possible key decision makers at European level, as I said, the Green Deal, but also at national level, at local level, and regional level. So just to conclude, before I introduce with pleasure this video clip for the gateway on the future of the Mediterranean, I simply want to say that this event was always conceived and should remain as a kind of bridge among the past and the future for underpinning new wave of policies that have to be integrated, as it was already very clearly said. However, with a kind of integrated scientific approach, exchange of data, exchange of information, we will create, as you know, possibly after this meeting, a community of practice. So we start to connect different scientists in different fields to understand how to solve in practice existing problems in this area, which, as I said, is very critical and very difficult. So from one technology to another. So again, the dialogue between science, policy, public sectors, citizens, is absolutely fundamental. So again, I'm very pleased and very honored that we have together this kind of first event, and I hope that there will be many others in the future. So having said that, again, I would like now to invite you to listen to this and to look at this video clip, which is just the gateway to the future of the Mediterranean, which is just going to last 6 minutes, just an introduction, but I think it's just a very impressive synthesis of what we want to look at and how we can look at possible solutions. Thank you.
By bringing together policymakers, practitioners, and scientists, we were able to identify the best practices to be implemented in a collaborative response throughout the Mediterranean.
Problems of the 21st century cannot be solved with old solutions, but looking into the past helps us to better understand our future. The European Commission and the Union for the Mediterranean, supported by numerous partners, scientists, artists and stakeholders, have created therefore something new. A voyage through space and time. A journey from the past to the future. A connector between people, science, politics and culture. Experience water, energy, food and the environment of the Mediterranean in a new way. Forging a new bond based on the Mediterranean identity. Featuring never-seen-before artworks, illustrations and paintings. Employing artificial intelligence to bring printed words to life. Engaging with the reader through augmented reality, video clips and audio recordings. A book not only for scientists and politicians, but for everybody. The gateway to the future of the Mediterranean. Discover a new experience, exploring and engaging with the water, energy, food and ecosystem nexus in the Mediterranean.
The Mediterranean region future lies on our ability to maintain a good socio-economic situation.
Vuole dire sviluppare una nuova cultura di consumo a livello individuale.
The chronicle of how people on the shores of the Mediterranean sought fertile land and the surrounding ecosystems influenced the establishment of settlements is the history of humankind itself. Human interaction with surrounding environmental factors and the technology provided the conditions for the momentous social, religious, economic and political events which have taken place and continue to occur on the shores of what the Romans called our sea. The history of this relationship is also the history of art and culture, the history of conflict, the history of philosophy. It has been the cause of enormous progress and of great failure, but above all, humankind's understanding of the interplay between water, energy, food and the ecosystem constitutes the foundations of a better future if it is capable of comprehending the fascinating lessons that its forefathers and nature itself never ceased to offer.
Computer simulations are powerful tools to understand and visualize how much water is available and how this might change in future. Different climate change scenarios and countermeasures are also considered in this process.
Η παραγωγή και ο εφοδιασμός τροφής καταναλώνουν πάνω από το 70% του γλυκού νερού και το 30% της ενέργειας παγκοσμίως, ενώ ρηπαίνουν το περιβάλλον και επηρεάζουν τη βιοποικιλότητα. Από την άλλη, μεγάλες ποσότητες νερού χρησιμοποιούνται για την παραγωγή και μεταφορά ενέργειας. Ο όρος Nexus εκφράζει τις αλληλοεξαρτήσεις μεταξύ του νερού, της ενέργειας, της τροφής και των οικοσυστημάτων, οι οποίες είναι συχνά ισχυρές και δεν πρέπει να αγνοούνται, αφού αναδεικνύεται ότι δράσεις ή πολιτικές σε ένα τομέα έχουν συνέπειες σε άλλους τομείς λόγω της ισχυρής διασύνδεσής τους.
Microalgae can be a substitute for traditional crops, deliver essential ingredients for the cosmetic industry, and are the ideal solution for managing greenhouse gas emissions. Among renewable energy resources, algae have also proven to be a very attractive option to generate biofuel.
Those who are most at risk, such as women and the youth, must take a prominent role in creating, implementing, and disseminating initiatives which involve Nexus solutions. It is time for them to step forward. It is women and girls, children and adolescents, the elderly and the poor, who are hit hardest by lack of water and food. It is they who suffer the consequences when sources of energy fail. Therefore, it is essential not only to inform, but also to empower hitherto discriminated groups. All society will benefit from the success of Nexus-based solutions, but the vulnerable have the most to gain as we move towards a more balanced social and economic community based on a healthy environment.
Join us in a travel across time and space from the past to the future of the Mediterranean and the water, energy, food ecosystem nexus.
This book gathers our shared vision on the way to proceed from science to practice and to obtain tangible positive results in the WEFE Nexus approach in our region.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Steve. I think that I hope you enjoyed the video and that it did raise your curiosity now to truly venture into the gateway for the future of the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, I can tell you that this is the first time that my director creates this kind of books that speaks and listen, and it will be available in 3 main languages, the 3 official languages of the Union, the Mediterranean. So the English, Arab, and French. The book will be possibly ready for distribution by the end of this year or beginning of next year. So I think that, again, I think we are making step ahead in approaching this kind of very modern and very new way of supporting new wave of policy. And with that, I would like to give you back again the floor, Steve, with my appreciation for your participation. And again, my thankfulness to all the guys, some you saw during the video that made it possible. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Giovanni, and thanks for sharing that that wonderful video, and really brings the subject matter to life in a very vibrant way. So that brings us to the conclusion of this opening panel. I would like to thank once again all of the panelists for their contributions. I think it's given us some very valuable inputs, some great food for thought for the discussions that we're going to be having now over the next few days. And the video presentation there of the Gateway to the Future of the Mediterranean, I think, also helped us to experience in an interactive way the different examples and some of the issues related to the WEFE Nexus in the Mediterranean. So I think we have important work ahead of us in these 3 days, but we start on strong foundations. And many thanks to the panelists for their insights and for their presence with us today, and their support for the joint efforts that we are making and that we still need to make in taking this important discussion forward. So with that, I would like to wish you very fruitful discussions over the next 3 days at this conference, which we've all been waiting for very impatiently, and now looking forward to taking it forward. Thank you very much, and have a great event.
Let's get a start now then. My name is Chris Burns. I'm talking to you from the European Parliament here on this 2021 WEFE Nexus Science Advances Conference. We're addressing interdependencies between water, energy, food, and ecosystems. And we are going to be talking with a high-level panel right now. You kind of got to know them just now. And also keep in mind that if you miss any of this, you can watch it back on YouTube later. So feel free on that. And you'll also send in your questions. You can send them on all 3 platforms, the GoToWebinar, Facebook, and YouTube. And keep in mind the hashtag WEFE Nexus. WEFE Nexus. If you heard a good soundbite or if you have a good comment to make from this, hopefully we'll have a lively discussion to talk about this. A very interesting meeting of the minds. This is almost like a workshop roundtable even. It is high level, but we also have so many parts of pieces of this puzzle that have to be put together for WEFE Nexus to work. Nexus of meeting of minds, and that's what we're doing right now. So for the next hour and 15 minutes, we're going to be doing this. I would like to begin with a keynote by Janis Potočnik, UNEP International Resource Panel. You're also ex-EU Commissioner, Science and Research. Janis, please tell us about those overarching and Mediterranean-specific resource use challenges.
Thank you, Chris. Dear friends, it's a real pleasure to be with you today for the WEFE Nexus conference on the water, energy, food ecosystems Nexus in the Mediterranean. It is in particular the pleasure to participate due to the active involvement also of the Cyprus Institute, to which I'm closely connected. I'm honored to be delivering this keynote on resource perspectives of the Mediterranean. Policy making can lead to effective and sustainable management of the region's natural resources. I'll first give some global context, then discuss Mediterranean natural resource use, and finally address the need for science and policy to work together to develop these systemic solutions. Before I speak on these important topics, let me just briefly introduce the International Resource Panel, shortly IRP. I co-chair the IRP with Isabella Teixeira. She is a former Brazilian Minister for Environment. Hosted by UNEP since 2007, we are a panel of up to 40 scientists from all over the world, brought together to consolidate knowledge and produce new insights on the management of natural resources and impacts and solutions. IRP is guided by the steering committee of around 35 countries, country government representatives around the world, and European Commission. It's a UN-based sister organization to IPCC, which you probably know better, and IPBES. I will first focus on the global picture, as mentioned, the common challenges faced by all of us, and then going to the challenges and opportunities linked to the Mediterranean. We are currently facing a triple planetary crisis on an unprecedented level. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution are no longer issues of the future. We are seeing their impacts already very clearly. Human activity has already warmed the climate by an average of 1 degree Celsius, and we are experiencing the devastating consequences already. During the most recent summer, extreme floods claimed hundreds of lives in multiple global regions. Uncontrolled wildfires destroyed entire towns. The triple planetary crisis is making instability the norm. And we know that all these aspects of the triple crisis share common origins: human activity and the unsustainable use of natural resources. Extraction of fossil fuels, metals, minerals, and biomass, and the use of land and water. IRP data shows that extraction and processing of natural resources drives 50% of global climate change, mainly via the production of fossil fuel products, biomass, steel, and cement. They also cause 90% of global land-related biodiversity loss and water stress, mainly due to agriculture, timber production, or ocean resource use. And natural resource industries, such as steel and coal, are also behind 1/3 of global air pollution, as well as water and land pollution. And trends are moving in the wrong direction. IRP data shows that if we do not take transformative measures, resource needs will double by 2060, causing annual carbon emissions to increase by a further 40%. What do these resource challenges look like in the Mediterranean? The topic of this conference summarizes this well. Challenges at the agri, food, water, ecosystem nexus. And I should point you towards the recent joint report from UNEP, Mediterranean Action Plan, and Planet Blue on state of the environment and development in Mediterranean. It really gives a very powerful overview of the issues. To start with agri-food. The Mediterranean has a large agricultural production deficit, being unable to produce enough agricultural and food products for its own consumption, highly dependent on international trade and imports of agricultural products. This means sensitivity to the volatility of international prices. To illustrate, Mediterranean countries account for 1/3 of the world's cereal imports for just 7% of world population. Yet, agriculture as a sector is so important for the livelihoods. For example, in Albania, agriculture makes up to 40% of national employment. Of course, the agriculture production deficit is deeply interconnected to resource challenges, to the land and water availability. In the Mediterranean region, the area of arable production land per capita fell by an average of 40% in the last 60 years. That's more than double the average of middle-income countries globally. In part, this is due to soil degradation caused by land use intensification and pollution. I'm talking about farming techniques and pollution from industrial and urban areas. In fact, Mediterranean fertilizer and pesticide use is double the global average. Soil degradation can lead to permanent loss of vegetation cover, with disastrous consequences for biodiversity and ecosystem services, and of course also for the agriculture itself. As well as the important terrestrial ecosystems at risk from soil degradation, coastal wetlands also provide crucial ecosystem services. We all rely on their water purification and provision, flood and drought mitigation. And the Mediterranean is a hotspot for marine biodiversity not found anywhere else on Earth. But due to infrastructure development and pollution, these ecosystems continue to decline. Let me briefly talk also about water, a really significant challenge for the region. Of course, it's not one situation for everyone. Water is not evenly distributed. Some northern countries are in relative water security, but over 10% of the population live in countries facing absolute water scarcity. Despite low availability, there's a high water footprint, which exceeds the global average, and it is linked to low water efficiency and to high levels of food waste. More water is abstracted than is available, which means that the Mediterranean is one of the most active desalination regions in the world. This creates its own environmental problems. Desalination plants emit significant pollution to marine ecosystems, which causes fish to migrate away. Of course, this worsens other issues. Fishing generates hundreds of thousands of jobs in the region, so desalination really puts livelihoods at risk. While I'm speaking of fisheries, I must point out that unsustainable resource use and poor governance also put ecosystems and future livelihoods at risk. Almost 4/5 of Mediterranean Black Sea fish stocks are overfished. And there are socioeconomic issues which multiply natural resource challenges. Tourism brings wealth, but comes with additional pressures. And the region is a migration hotspot. As we speak, IRP is generating a report on the relationship between migration and natural resources. And I hope it will be of use also to Mediterranean policymakers. No doubt, serious challenges exist, but we take hope from the region's major opportunities. Firstly, there are some very encouraging developments in renewable energy production. The contribution of renewables to electricity production has increased massively in the last 3 decades. And there is a huge potential for the southern Mediterranean in particular to increase its wind and solar energy. And secondly, citizens in Mediterranean countries really care about their environment. Survey data has shown that people here have higher concern than the EU average about the impact of environmental issues on their daily lives. The Mediterranean leaders can take stock of the existing high support for environmental legislation and high support for more investment in solutions. This is so important. It is often assumed that environmental action from countries' leaders will cause backlash from the electorate, but we have clear evidence this is not the case. This leads me to the solutions. We have seen from interactions between the challenges that solutions need to take the whole system approach. Desalination, a solution to low water availability, causes fresh problems for the marine environment. We need to look for solutions which avoid trade-offs and maximize shared benefits. For example, construction with high-quality green materials will not lead to truly green cities if urban sprawl development continues, if cities are not built and reorganized with sustainable space functioning in mind. And we can reduce emissions through electrifying mobility, But if individual vehicle ownership does not change, then resource use impacts will continue to increase. Thinking of systemic solutions, this is where huge potential for the interaction between science and policy can and should really bear fruit. Let me highlight some of the IRP's work ready to use resource management solutions for the triple crisis using the example of climate. Last December, we published our report, Resource Efficiency for Climate Change, a topic very much in line with your recent working paper. We focused on housing and mobility, two systems where changing patterns of utilization as well as making the material use embedded in their production circular could make a considerable contribution to reducing emissions. In housing, building residential space to be used more intensively could have a huge impact. In the world's richest countries, material efficiency strategies like reduced floor space and use of recycled building materials could reduce building life cycle emissions by over a third in the next decades. And in mobility, the way we utilize vehicles can also make a big difference. Ride sharing, car sharing reduce the number of vehicles needed to meet the travel demand. Fewer vehicles, less environmental damaging impact from resource use embedded in production. That is the kind of evidence which points to the need to change our socially embedded expectations about use of the resources and space. Policies incentivizing increased building use intensity, such as relaxing single-family zoning, encouraging public transport and ride sharing, for example, by reserving part of the road for shared rides, can make resource use more sustainable, but also bring other co-benefits. If you build an efficient, shared, and circular transport system, you will not only reduce transport emissions and improve public health, but save tons of steel for private cars, require fewer batteries and critical raw materials, require less energy, and even free the land. In the context of system thinking, let me also point you towards a recent piece of work done by Systemic and the Club of Rome, the System Change Compass. It outlines principles for achieving system change in diverse economic ecosystems, including housing and mobility, but also food and consumer goods based on natural resource management logic. We need to work together to seize the opportunities and build resilient systems based on science and implementing innovative policy solutions. To address the drivers of the Mediterranean's resource use challenges, we need to deeply reconsider and change natural resource use. Often, and that means fundamentally changing our economic systems. Often, it is economic incentives which drive our production and consumption patterns. And currently, our economic systems see humanity as being external to nature and incentivize its destruction, actually. The Dasgupta review, published earlier this year, highlights the failure of contemporary economics to acknowledge that we are embedded and not external to nature, and encourages us to act accordingly. It makes the case for basing economic decisions on an inclusive measure of wealth based on human, produced, and natural capital. Taking natural capital seriously will enable financial flows to be channeled towards the natural resources we want to protect and away from their unsustainable destruction. This will be a future focus of IRP. Our next Global Resource Outlook will really look in detail at economic system change in the context of resource use. Dear friends, to conclude, what would all this mean in policy terms? Redefining consumption from owing to using. Redefining production from mass sales to providing efficient functionalities, human needs. Redefining core economic incentives, such as taxation, subsidies, public procurement, as well as existing financial potential. It would also mean making integrated well-being the objective across the policies, measuring sustainability with a life cycle perspective, harmonizing efforts across all policy areas, and looking at innovation in categories of economic ecosystems that provide societal functions rather than in categories of production sectors. It all starts with understanding that for the first time in human history, we face the emergence of single, tightly coupled human socio-ecological system of planetary scope. We are more interconnected and interdependent than ever, and our individual and collective responsibility has thus enormously increased. Sharing sovereignty, which means cooperating more, joining our forces, and coming together as scientists and policymakers to find systemic solutions is the best and actually the only reasonable way to manage our collective future. And we humans are supposed to be reasonable and intelligent, aren't we? I wish you a very successful conference, and thank you again for inviting me to speak. And yes, my sincere apologies also that I will have to leave soon due to another event I have to attend. Back to you, Chris.
Yanis, thank you so much. And it's quite, you're throwing down the gauntlet to all of us to try to come up with, talk about solutions and how we can work together on life cycle perspective, that we need green construction, electric mobility, shared mobility, smarter agriculture. It's a long wish list, but we have to talk about how we can make this happen across the Mediterranean. We're all in it together, as you say. Let's talk about that. What can research and innovation partnerships do to raise awareness and put into action this WEFE Nexus in the Mediterranean region? Let's talk to Angelo Ricaboni of the Prima Foundation. Angelo, please.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Janet, for your presentation, which really highlighted which are the challenges of the Mediterranean. I would like to add on top of it that we need also to ensure that farmers are at the center of the food systems, can have a fair rate of return. We need also to ensure that those who work in the ground have a social position, have a social fair rate of return, because otherwise it is very difficult to continue with our Mediterranean food system and to make it sustainable. So in this context, as you said, we need an approach which overcomes silos. So the WEFE approach, which means water, energy, food, ecosystem, is badly needed. And the point from our perspective, which is the perspective of innovation, what we can say is that that approach is very important, but very difficult to implement. So we need to work hard in order to make it clear that that is a very important solution to be in a Nexus approach, and that innovation can be fundamental in this Nexus approach, because we need not only look at different dimensions altogether, but we need to find innovations which are able to deal with all the four parts that we have mentioned. Researchers and innovators have been working for a long time in a vertical way. A lot of specialization, a lot of focus on single topics. Now we need to have a broader perspective, and we need to see things in a different way. So we need to give a clear example, and we need a vision. This is the reason why I think this conference is so important, because we have major actors like the European Commission, like UFM, which say we need a vision, we need to look at things in a different way. So that is extremely important. Secondly, we need a different way of governing processes. So in terms of governance, we need a multi-stakeholder approach, and that is something which has been highlighted also at the Food System Summit in New York. So we need to look at these things in a multi-stakeholder perspective. Third, we need to promote good results. We need to show that there are good cases where these things have happened and they brought interesting consequences. So we need to collect, valorize, highlight good practices of a WEFE approach. So we as Prima, we are working on it, and we are First of all, we are based upon the principle of equal footing, which means that countries from all over the Mediterranean, we are 19 countries, 11 from the north, 8 from the south. We work together according to the principle of equal footing, which is at the basis of it. So we need to go in this direction, and we, as I'll say later, probably, we have already launched calls in these terms. We have 129 projects already funded, and in recent years, we have 17 of them according to the WEFE perspective, and we will go in this direction more and more in the future. And I think also that the community of practice goes in the right direction, so I'm very pleased that as an outcome of this meeting, we are also working on this issue of a community of practice. Chris, I will
Angelo,
stop.
can I just ask you a little bit more about those 17 projects? Because I see in the notes that I have, they address the Nexus WEFE at different angles with 136 beneficiaries with a total allocated budget of around 22 million euros spread over 16 participating states across the Mediterranean region. Can you give us one example of that?
Yeah, I mean, we have these projects which are focused on that. There's one called, for instance, Awesome. Researchers always find very bizarre names for their projects. One is called Awesome, and is about an analytical platform which is monitoring interdependencies among sectors, and also it is promoting and adopting an integrated approach. And in particular, this is a focus on solar power hydroponics, trying to demonstrate different solutions in terms of use of water, energy in agriculture, maximizing the productivity of a unit of water. So this is a clear example of putting together water, energy, and food, because we are talking about solar power hydroponics and aquaponics. Another one is called Sigma Nexus, and this is about the capacity building tool. They are trying to co-design Nexus initiatives among different countries. There's another one called Lenses, which is about food security and ecosystem. So there's a strong interest in this Nexus approach, and we are going in the right direction, I think.
Let's hear a little bit more on this from Isidro González Afonso. Welcome, Isidro. Buenos días. Union for the Mediterranean Deputy Secretary General for Water and Energy at UFM. I might remind people that UFM represents 42 member countries from Europe and the Mediterranean Basin. That's the 27 EU member states plus 15 Mediterranean partner countries. Let's pick up a little bit where Angelo left off there. I think you can probably add to the mix here, and talking about solutions. There's one thing that I think is interesting. You said there's a need for a unified knowledge platform. Is that right?
Yes. Good morning. Sorry, I had some connection problems at the beginning with my tablet, so I couldn't join you before. Yes. Yeah. I mean, as Angelo said, good morning to Angelo and to the rest of my friends there. Well, we are at the Union for the Mediterranean. We are, and you also said that, Chris, we are 42 member countries, 27 European Union member countries, and then 15 from the Mediterranean region, including even Mauritania, which is not very Mediterranean, but it is our member. And there we are trying to coordinate, because if we don't work together, the outcomes, the results are not satisfactory at all. And in the field we are discussing today in this very timely conference, we need to stress that until now the intersections between climate and water, energy, and food have not been clearly presented, but they are more and more relevant. This interlinkage between water, energy, agriculture, and natural ecosystems is very obvious, and we are working on that. We are launching even a report with the help of MEDIC, the institution MEDIC, a thematic report that will be prepared for the end of this year and next year, 22, and which will be focused on the climate, water, energy, food ecosystems nexus. This report is an example of the activities we are doing. Will also address the transfer and integration of nexus-related knowledge into national, regional, and transboundary policy making, by defining specific policy issues, mainly related to water, extreme events, floods, droughts. We have seen many of them this summer. Water scarcity, pollution, and food and energy security. So there is a lot of activities, a lot of things that we can do, and we at the Union for the Mediterranean, being the only fully Mediterranean or Euro-Mediterranean organization, we are in a good position to coordinate, to do this coordination role, which is so relevant in order to be effective.
Isidro, you mentioned in the notes that I've seen that you're calling for knowledge transfer. You just talked about transfer for practical operational targets. Is that something that's in your study, in your upcoming report? Maybe you can give us a sneak peek. What is an example of an operational target you would like to see?
Well, we like to, overall, we would like to see that the citizens, people on the ground, they feel the results, and if we do a report, it's not only to shelve it, put it in a nice library, but to be effective. We would like to propose, to suggest, to invite other institutions to go to implement different projects to change people's life. Because when we alert about this, or we highlight this nexus between water, climate, energy and food, we need to change. For instance, for food, not talking about food, we need to change as soon as possible the way of consuming, the way of producing food. We have to make a quick transition to a sustainable way of producing and consuming food, which is things have to change dramatically, because the situation is now there is we have managed to raise awareness to all the population in the Mediterranean about the need to change, to move to a circular, sustainable economic system, and this includes sustainability in all fields, in the water use, in the energy use, the use of energy in food consumption and production.
So that means getting people involved, everybody. We're all in it together. I think what you're saying is it's not just from the top down, it's from the bottom up as well, that we need that kind of participation even by the general public. And for those watching, please do send in your questions through the chat. We'd like to get to them as soon as possible. But in the meantime, Pavel Misiga, Head of Unit, DG Research and Innovation at the European Commission. Pavel, how can you add to that mix? Maybe you said that there is a disconnect between science, knowledge, and policy governance and economy with entrepreneurs. How can this, what we're talking about now, bring those together into that nexus?
Yes, thank you for the floor. It's a great challenge, because we are speaking about transformation of our society. Very deeply rooted way of producing, consuming, behaving, etc. So it is not a trivial task. This is, it's actually very difficult. But we have certain vision of the transformation towards sustainability, and I believe that what is needed is a lot of experimentation and innovation. This transformation is essentially an innovation process, and we need experiments. We need experiments that involve all relevant stakeholders. So this is what we try to do in European Commission, in DG Research and Innovation, to support such innovations and experimentation and demonstrations of solutions, systemic solutions. So we are kind of moving from dealing with little problems. We know that there are many problems that have to be solved, but we already have a lot of solutions. We know a lot about interdependencies and trade-offs between, for example, these four thematic areas or sectors, or WEFE sectors. We know a lot of solutions that have been tested at small scale, at you know, a kind of laboratory level or low technology readiness level projects. What we need now is to bring them together and demonstrate solutions, systemic solutions at larger scale. And we need this you know, to create a critical mass of these demonstrators, so that the market, the society starts to change slowly, because suddenly we see that these disruptive projects, this project that deal with things differently, that they have many benefits, and people become convinced and they can repeat this project. So it is very important that that the innovation policy moves in this direction, and Prima Foundation is one example when we are applying this approach in very concrete way.
I meant to ask you with it, so that following up on that, the tools and methods to connect those different parts of the solution. I guess Prima is one example. Are there other examples that you can mention as far as tools and methods?
Well, this support to innovation, the support to demonstrations, close to market, close to real situation, is one thing. The other thing that what is very important is incentives, and Jan has mentioned incentives actually, and it is very important that that policymakers think about that, how to incentivize different actors to move in certain direction. And there are many types of incentives. It doesn't necessarily economic incentives. There are many incentives that of different kind of reputational, you know, kind of social norm, behavioral incentives. So it is important that that we create incentives that will stimulate different actors to act together, to find solutions together, implement those solutions. It is mainly a responsibility of policymakers. So this is why I emphasize the role of governance and innovation in governance, so that we can trigger, we can stimulate these changes that we want to see. Another change that we need, in my view, is bringing together scientists and practitioners, be it, you know, entrepreneurs in the private sector or policymakers in governance systems, because we still see that they work a kind of, you know, two apart, dealing with, you know, living in their own communities, speaking a different language, having different objectives, but in our field, in innovation, when we see that that the stakeholders meet and have meaningful discussion, that we see amazing results, much more effective and you know, surprising. So we have to bring this. And again, I believe that innovation project, large-scale demonstrations, are key to that, so that you know, everybody sees their part and role in such demonstration projects. Scientists bringing scientific solutions, technological solutions, but also entrepreneurs, because they see the opportunities, creation of markets for them, etc., and policymakers to be better public servants, basically, to solve problems. Yeah.
So as far as entrepreneur, and you talk about also incentives, what role can EU research and innovation funds play in all of this as an incentive, as maybe perhaps a bit of risk sharing?
Absolutely. Risk is very important for entrepreneurs and also for investors who actually fund entrepreneurs. So so we can do a lot to cover risk by taking certain risky element from innovation under public responsibility. Either we fund projects that address certain and remove risk in terms of testing solutions, testing technologies. We can also de-risk investment through a specific instrument, and we experiment with such instruments to make risk for investors, very high risk from innovation, to reduce it by taking the first loss from project that may fail. I think when I speak about experimentation, we have to accept that some project will also fail and some initiative will fail, but majority will go ahead and find solutions. So we have to accept that we can fail in individual cases and take the risk and invest in that and accept that loss, because the majority will succeed.
I might add, I'm talking to you from the European Parliament here, and the members of Parliament a few months ago voted that this is a climate emergency we're dealing with. Stefano Dotto, team leader for climate and environment in the South Mediterranean at DG NEAR. Stefano, can you, how do you add to this as far as what action needs to be taken, what the priority is for the European Commission?
Thank you, Chris. Well, sorry, I'm not going to take. Why are they calling me now? I don't know. Okay. Well, the priorities Commission for the very near future are defined by the Green Deal, and we're adopting a package of I think 55 legal acts, and counting. And of course, our priorities are broadly to reach zero net emission, zero pollution in the long run, and of course water is a critical area for water. Can I just maybe come back on what Pavel just said about we risk to fail? Of course we risk to fail, but that's a clever way to use public money, and this is what we're doing here. I'd like to draw your attention on the fact that we work often with demo projects. Professor Riccaboni also hinted to innovation, trying things. Yes, we do that. We even recently launched a call for proposals on demo projects where we tried to have innovative solutions to water efficiency, just how to make the best of the resource available. And we are going to disseminate the results of this project through the UFM platforms, for instance. So, of course, some projects may fail, but it doesn't mean that we've lost our money, because we learn from the failures to start with.
Yeah.
And in the initial phase, certain innovations cost an awful amount of money, but when you scale them up, when you transfer them to other beneficiaries in similar conditions, then you really get a very, very big return on what I call the investment, not the expenditure. And in particular on the efficient resource, on the efficient use of resources. I think that Commissioner Potocnik, who inspired the switch projects at the time on circular economy, we're implementing the SwitchMed project in the Mediterranean region, and there I've witnessed personally in a business very water intensive in the textile sector, well, they were saving 90% of the water. That's amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing.
It's and not only just the water that was consumed was then recycled internally and then cleaned and possibly put back in the system. So, and these are the projects that we try to disseminate and to showcase.
Yeah. Right, excellent. Stefano, thank you. I want to get quickly to Yanis because Yanis, I know you have to leave in like about 8 minutes. I hope if that's a hard leave, then we got to get to you very quickly now. You want to add to that before I have a question from the audience, but I want to give you a chance to maybe comment on what's been said up to now, especially what Stefano said in reference to you.
No, I think many good points were raised. I would in particular like to point on the question of incentives, because as long as we live in market economies, you know, producers and consumers are actually led by incentives. Yeah. And if I simplify a bit the story, then one can conclude that productive capital is overvalued and over-rewarded, human capital is undervalued and under-rewarded, and natural capital, unfortunately, in many cases, is not valued at all. Which, of course, will never lead to socio-environmental economic balance if we do not really correct those incentives. But if we start correcting the incentives, if we start valuing natural capital, if we start more sincerely implementing polluter pays principle, that would definitely mean also some price increases and pressure.
More realistic price on carbon, for instance.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And but of course, this will be unfortunately affordability of many would even worsen. That's why I firmly believe that everything we are talking about, it's actually deeply connected also with the transformation, which doesn't go only in environmental area, but also in the social area. So the things are interconnected. And while we talk about the Nexus, I don't know, in WEFE context, Nexus in the governance context, we have to talk also about the Nexus when we combine, sorry, economic, social, and environmental solutions. I think it will simply not fly without taking everything simultaneously into account and trying to solve those issues in a proper way. If you go too much one direction, you simply create new lock-ins, and lock-ins have cost us so much because anybody who has an interest is of course trying to defend the interest, and if you create anything which it's a major trade-off for the future, then you have the problem which is simply going from one type of a problem to another type of the problem.
Again, before you leave, because we have what now, about 5 minutes left with you, here's a question from the audience, and please do, all of you watching, please do send in more through the chat. So to Mr. Potocnit from Ad-Duru, if I understand correctly, you are not in favor of desalination in the Mediterranean because of the effects of the brine to sea ecology. What alternatives do you see in face of reduced water availability in the Mediterranean to keep up with the demands? This is a question from Ad-Duru, Nexus leader, JRC.
Why we would not start from the demands and go the other way and try to first discuss what can we do to limit the demand? Is the demand maybe the problem and not the supply? So I'm aware that not everything can be dealt without also some of the solutions which have environmental consequences. That's clear. But I think that too many times we lock our thinking into like it would be absolutely necessary that some things are like they are. The whole philosophy which I try to push via the circular economy thinking is we don't need car, we need mobility, we don't need light bulbs, we need light. You don't need the chair on which you are sitting, you need to sit. You don't need CDs, you need to listen to the music. Thank God here we have already far enough that we have introduced that kind of concept in our lives. So all that brings the materialization. And this rethinking of the ownership behind, it's an important point. Why I consider that so important. If you are selling, if a producer is selling me the light bulb, the profit it's the many of the light bulbs he's selling to me. If he or she would be selling me the light bulbs are becoming his cost, which means that you incentivize producer to save the natural, to save the resources. You can revert the economic systems in a way that the consumer doesn't have less, but that actually you incentivize producers using less natural resources. And I think we need basically, as Pavel rightly said, we need innovation also in innovation.
Okay, please, everyone watching, send in your questions through the chat. Here's another one. To you, Yanis, because I know you have to leave in a couple of minutes. How could governance help address the issues? How to identify and implement more suitable governance models?
Yeah, I think that, of course, using all the levels of governance, it's essential. But I think what is fundamentally important to understand is that we are the first generation ever on this planet which is living in socio-ecological space of planetary scope. First, if somebody doesn't understand that, then I hope that the COVID has wakened them up. But the climate, COVID, internet, trade, traveling, everything is basically last generation. And that it's, of course, implicitly saying that we are together, first time tasked to manage the planet, which means sharing sovereignty. It's an important part of owing sovereignty, because that's the way how we can actually get to the results and address the challenges which we need to resolve. But of course, when I talk about those issues, for me, it's as much important that you also take the responsibility, take the opportunities, for example, on the cities level, because cities have two interesting things which needs to be taken into account. First of all, the governance in cities is it's less dependent on the decisions of the governments or global decisions, because if you have a good mayor, it can do a lot, and that can be perfectly used. And the second is that the cities are where basically the problems concentrate and where the solutions are also concentrating. So on all those governance levels, I think you need to start to understand that cooperating better and using all the opportunities is necessity. But I think it's essential that we point that these trends needs to be, this is actually a global challenge. And that's why I have considered European Green Deal as such an important breakthrough, because it's actually pointing the first time on such a political level to the very clear direction, which is saying, okay, future economic development, it's not in contradiction with preserving ecosystems, with protecting environment. On the contrary, it's actually based on the condition that we will do that. And that is essential to understand.
Yanis Potočnik, UNEP International Resource Panel. Thank you so much. I know you have to move on, and so thank you so much for having joined us. For all of those who don't know, you are an ex-EU Commissioner for Science and Research, so obviously the guy to talk to, and thank you so much for your keynote as well. We'll speak to you soon, I hope.
Thank you, and take care, all of you.
Thank you, Yanis. Let's move on to some other questions. Angelo, I'd like to get to you. Angelo Ricaboni, the chairman of the Prima Foundation. I'd like to ask you, what from what you've heard up to now, because you were the second speaker after the keynote by Yanis. What are your feelings now after what you've heard so far?
Yes, this is a good question. I think that what it emerges is that we need to innovate in innovation, because innovation is key. Innovation, I mean, everybody, especially after the COVID experience, understands that without science, without innovation, we cannot make it, okay? So innovation is key, but we need to innovate in the way we do innovation. WEFE is a completely new way of looking at problems and solutions. But also, as it was said before, we need to do something which might fail. So we need to take into consideration that we need to help innovators and researchers to support the risk, which is a very important issue that we have not given a lot of attention so far.
That's actually a good something to send out on the hashtag WEFE Nexus. That, about supporting the risk to fail. That's part of what we need to do, right?
Yeah. But third, and I'm really keen on it, we need to put together researchers and practitioners and businesses. We've been working on it for 30 years. It is very difficult. It has always been very difficult. So if we really want to go ahead, I think that this third point is very, very relevant. So we need to find new solutions to do it. For instance, I'm sure that we need to create new professional figures able to talk to innovators, science, and business. So we need to find new ways to connect the two worlds. And without it, everything will be very, very difficult. Even in a program like Prima, which is the most ambitious and the most important program ever launched in the Mediterranean on food systems with a budget of €500 million, I admit that it's not easy to talk to business. So I think that that is a key point that we need to work on. Now we are, I mean, on the edge of a new strategic agenda for many organizations in the Mediterranean, UFM, but also PRIMA. So I'm sure that we will put at the center of our strategic agenda these 3 points, in particular the last point.
Okay, let me move on to Pavel Misiga. Did you have something else to say? Sorry.
Just to say that this is the reason why I like the project of the community of practice that they are working on in this venue, because the community of practice is a good solution for this purpose. Back to you, Chris.
Okay, question to Pavel Misiga. Here's a question from Shmuel Yerushalayim. I don't know, let's see, hang on. I want to ask the panelists of this discussion, very important question. How, according to your opinion, are we able to be built true regional cooperation for more effective performance of plans to construction of renewable infrastructures and resolving of problems of food and water security, especially on the background of permanent unceasing climate crisis? About this, I guess, regional cooperation, that's the key, right? Pavel?
Well, regional cooperation is one element. I would like to refer back to what Yanis actually said, that we have to understand what is the balance between natural and socioeconomic system, and to find a sustainable and balanced state between them in each region. And I know that this is particularly difficult in Mediterranean, because this balance is very much, of the situation, the reality is very much out of balance because of specific climatic, demographic and other conditions. So, but this is the first step, and then we have to think what kind of transitions we need in the economy, how we adapt agriculture, how we adapt industry and energy system, transport system, so that we that they can exist. They don't, you know, kind of cannibalize each other, and then implement this transition. And in this implementation, what I think is very important is this experimentation and demonstration project, simply to invest in this project to generate a critical mass of these alternative approaches, transitional approaches, so that they gradually try to move the mainstream, you know, in this way. And what is important in this process, both in this analysis, what is the balance and the vision for the region, is something that I would call co-creation, which is for me, my understanding of co-creation is truly open, collaborative process with all relevant stakeholders, those stakeholders who have to act to get all the knowledge, or who have to be present to get all the relevant knowledge, and all the actors or stakeholders who have to be present, because they will have to carry these activities and make changes in real life. And there must be understanding between them. There is potential for finding collaborative solutions where risks and benefits can be shared, so that, you know, very often some stakeholders do not want to move because they may benefit or simply survive in the current situation. They may be afraid to change because they see that all the risk, all the cost falls up on them while somebody else benefits. So we need to find.
Okay. Sorry, Pavel. Go ahead, finish your thought. Yeah.
Platforms and mechanisms for sharing risks and benefits from the transition.
I guess maybe Angelo, Isidro, could you add to something about that, through that regional cooperation and sharing risks?
Isidro, please.
Yes, Angelo. Still, don't know, you can hear me now. Yes, well, the same. I go back to what I said before. An example of coordination, well, on climate issues and environmental issues, and of course, water and food. We have a good example. We will have a good example next Monday in Cairo city in Egypt, where we will convene this ministerial meeting on environment and climate action with the presence of the Vice President of the Commission, Mr. Timmermans, maybe Commissioner Sinkevičius, and many ministers from different countries, kindly hosted by Egypt. So this is an example of coordination at a high level, and an example of what should be a top-down approach to all these issues. So there, we will, after the ministerial itself, we will have a two-sided event, one devoted to green financing, but the other one will be devoted to the ecosystems, to food system management. So we will tackle all these issues there at a very high level, and this is a good example of working together all the European and Mediterranean countries.
Angelo, you want to add on regional cooperation?
Yeah, just to say that I completely agree with Pavel. And just to give you an example of what is going on, now there are these initiatives called living labs and lighthouses, which are centers in the case of living labs, or farms in the case of lighthouses, where you put together various actors and they work in a spirit of co-creation. And for instance, in terms of the mission on soil health and food, the mission by the European Commission, the goal of the mission will be to create 100 of these living labs in Europe. So this gives you an idea that everybody now is really concerned about the co-creation, about working together. This is a great sign of hope, because there's a strong willingness to go in this direction. So we need to go to that direction and to push these kind of things also in the Mediterranean, because it is even more difficult, but we can make it.
I have another question coming in, and please, for all of you watching, please do send in more questions via the chat. We have another 20 minutes left. Dr. Salam Al-Rabadi asks, can it be argued that environmental negotiations are a political issue that can no longer be ignored, and therefore should not rely solely on specialists or personnel leading the negotiations, and who often lack either the political mandate or the expertise to resolve most environmental issues? Maybe Stefano, would you like to mention, to answer that?
Well, yes, but I don't think this is enough as an answer. Well, in fact, Isidro mentioned the ministerial meeting that we're having next week. It's been a long way in the preparation of this ministerial meeting, and it's been discussions at several levels. We started from practitioners, from technical dialogue in the environment and climate working groups in the context of the UFM, through technicians. And by the way, one thing that I would like to say, referring to the previous questions, what is the role of regional cooperation, is that technicians talk to each other, whatever happens. Even in presence of political tensions, etc., we see very good cooperation about like-minded people and experts. So do not, how can I say, rate poorly the dialogue at technical level. However, this technical level then escalates to the point where the declaration that is going to be adopted on the 4th is adopted by ministers. So, and ministers base their conclusions on the technical dialogue. So there is a very strong link between research, facts, and policies. That's why from our side we insist so much on what we say evidence-based policies. There is no policy without proper information. But I wouldn't say that there is that politicians lack of the knowledge. They only have larger constituencies, and what is considered as selfish by one is just reflects a different situation in one country compared to another one. And sorry, we have to take into account all situations if we want to achieve something together.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the policy making nexus we need on this. Here's another question: what role to play for local authorities and citizens? We kind of touched on that about the mayors. Sorry about that. This is the parliament. Things happen. How can they contribute to addressing the issues in the Mediterranean? Isidro, would you like to answer that one?
Well, yes, of course. The role of local authorities is key. We have convened many meetings with local authorities because they are the closest one to the people, and they are the ones to implement the measure that they will be felt and will be seen by the citizens immediately. So it is important to this coordination. Then from local, you go to regional authorities, and then to national authorities, and then we have the international organizations or intergovernmental organizations like the Union for the Mediterranean and others. So it's so important because as I say, they are the ones close to the people. They are the ones who can listen to the demands of people, what they are lacking, what they need, where are the problems, and they are the ones who transmit it to the broader authorities. So be it regional or be it national or international, to find solutions. So it is key, the involvement of the local authorities. Sure.
Can I take that one step further, Isidro? How do you get the local population? How do you instill behavioral change in the local population?
Behavioral change. Well, this has to begin by raising awareness even in the schools from the very early age. This is now I'm very proud to see young people so active, even these days in a country like Germany in Europe, in the days before the election, how the climate issues were so relevant for the voting in such a big country. This is a good example. It's a motivation. I see Pavel also raising the hand. This is what we need. This is what we need the people from the very beginning, since they are young boys and girls at the school, they are aware of the problems, and they demand the politicians to react. This is good news, and this is promising for the future.
Stefano, I know you want to add to this, but Pavel, please, you first. You need to turn your mic on, Pavel.
Just a few ideas. I think we have to realize, and let's be honest, we have to admit there is a lot of inertia and resistance in the system. The system we have, our socio-economic system, have been developing for a long time. It's kind of consolidated. It's just not sustainable. And there are many actors, many stakeholders who are not really prone to innovate. And here we agree, the panel agree that we have to innovate. So there are stakeholders who are more ready to innovate than others. And I think that this is the idea of the community of practice, is that these innovators, these actors who are willing to innovate and have interest in that, and are less risk are willing to take risk, they can start the process. Others, politicians, very often politicians simply don't want to change because the change is risky also for politicians. Very often established industry doesn't want to change because they control the market, they have market power, etc., etc. So it is small innovative companies that want change because they want new markets with new products, new services, etc. So what we have to do is to start this process with the community of practice, with all those willing, and everybody may have different motivations. Scientists simply want to be there because they know that there is a problem. Some entrepreneurs want to be there because they know that they can find new markets or new profit or whatever. Some public institutions want to be in that process because they are responsible for solving the the problem. So these are the willing, these are those who are prepared to enter. And very often local authorities may be those willing to innovate or experiment, because they may deal with smaller scale problem, but also they may have freedom to do certain things. They may have contact to local constituencies, you know, that want this change, etc. So very often local and regional authorities are more flexible and more innovative than the national administration. So this is why they are important innovation partners.
The potential for the Nexus coalition of the willing, right? Stefano, you wanted to add more on local, thinking global, acting local, right?
Correct, absolutely. Pavel is absolutely right. You have great innovators among local authorities, also in particular in the Mediterranean region. Why? Maybe because they're close to their population, because there's a young population and which is aware and very sensitive to climate and environmental issues. We have a great cooperation with local authorities in the countries, and many of them have joined the Covenant of Mayors, where literally hundreds of local authorities and municipalities have joined this covenant by committing to go beyond the national determined contributions of their country. There are municipalities, for instance, in Tunisia, who have zero climate impact objective by 2030, if not before. So things are happening. And there is one issue. There is a problem of funding. They need funds. So we have tried something. I hope it's going to work. We've started a project where we are putting a small amount of EU grants where that local authorities, in certain cases it will be municipalities, in others it will be governorates, whatever. It depends on how the country is organized. And they will use these funds as a base to start attracting more investment to realize climate-related investments. This project is working.
Like seed money, almost like seed money, right?
Exactly, precisely. Yeah. And I think that this is the way things have to go in the future. And anyway, this is the way EU funds will be used more and more in the future, with trying to leverage on the market to other donors, etc. But again, local authorities are a fabulous actor of change, in particular in the Mediterranean region.
Okay, here's a question coming in, and we have another 10 minutes, so please feel free to send in more through the chat, please, all of you watching. Co-design, co-creation is great, but how do we best foster this new adaptive interdisciplinary capacity in scientists and engineers who are trained in expert-led top-down communications? This is a question from Ian Stewart. Who would like to answer that? Don't all jump at once. Maybe Angelo, would you like to comment on that?
I mean, this question concerns interdisciplinary approach, which, as we said before, now it is fundamental. So we need to put together the two things, the interdisciplinary approach and the need for participation, because interdisciplinary means that you have researchers from different areas, which is important. But at the same time, you need to put together with the needs of citizens and also with the needs of farmers and businesses. So you need to put together things which are not easy to do. And this also is linked to what you said before about local authorities, because we should never forget that food is not a commodity. Food is something special. Food is culture. Food is a life. Food is a living together. Food is our past and our future. And everybody is concerned about food. And as it was said before, many cities have their own, they call it local food policies. And the food policies are really a first step in the right direction. So we need to work on it with this approach, put it together, different perspectives, but also different stakeholders. But what I would like to add is that we need also to work against fake news and bad information about food. Because at the end of the story, all what we are seeing is possible if consumers have the right information, if consumers are aware of the relevance of sustainable and healthy diets for their health and the health of the planet. Because if the consumers are aware, then they buy proper stuff, then they have the proper behavior. So the point is that we need to induce the right education, but also we need to avoid that the web is full of fake information, fake news about the food. So I think that this is a very important contribution that we all should give in terms of making sure that we can promote the right information about food.
Isidro, at the Union for the Mediterranean, is there any more to add on that? I think there probably would be, right?
Yeah, well, the same in general. Coming back to the need for coordination from to all levels. We mentioned before, Stefan and me, the ministerial. We talk about local authorities. I have a talk about the schools. I underline the role, the excellent role of PRIMA with the community of scientists projects in the Mediterranean. This is a very visionary project, in my opinion, which is going very well. It has a very good vision. So there are many things that can be added. I suppose we have no more time. But again, the important thing is to be here for all the participants who are listening and following us today, and to launch the message of this need of coordination, of raising awareness, and of working together. This is what we are trying to do at all levels in the Mediterranean, and indeed, this is a sea or a region, the Mediterranean Sea, where we are putting in practice this way of acting together. We are trying, and this will pay off. This is for sure.
Here's another question coming in: how to make sure that WEFE Nexus knowledge is disseminated to all stakeholders, taken up by practitioners, and eventually translated into legislation? That's a question aimed at Angelo, but I think, Pavel, you were raising your hand there. Not anyway. Angelo, what's your take on that?
Well, in terms of dissemination, of course, it's not an easy task. But what we are doing is also working on this side, because you need to do, but also you need to promote what you are doing and to scale it up, because the real point is how to scale it up. I completely agree with Hannes before. He said about desalinization, which is dangerous, that pollutes, and we need to find different solutions. So there are some interesting solutions, but we need to work on them, we need to innovate, but then we scale them up. So we need to find new things, but we need to work on scaling things up. And the Commission is very important in this. There are many programs on it, and we can rely on this program. So if somebody is interested to know more about our WEFE project, please send me an email, or we are very pleased to share and to contribute to scaling up our proposals.
You know, got about 4 minutes left. If there are any final comments, I also would like to sort of tease the next session after the break. We'll have a break at the top of the hour, then we're back with you at 14:15 CET. Nexus Talk 1 on energy transition in the Mediterranean and the implications for the WEFE Nexus, renewables-based energy water approaches, that being obviously two parts of the WEFE Nexus. Would anybody like to comment before we wrap it up on what we discussed now, and pitch forward on these next talks? It's very important that we're going to start to talk about the nuts and bolts of making this WEFE Nexus work. Stefano.
No, I don't think I have to add much. I would just like to thank all the participants for this brilliant insight, and please transmit my thanks to the inspiring words of ex-Commissioner Potocnik.
Great.
And,
Pavel? Yeah, sorry.
I'm following it very closely, because I think that exactly being a conveyor belt between lessons learned, policy and practice is part of my job.
Pavel, I guess that's part of your job too, right?
Absolutely, but I would like to come back to question. Maybe I did not understand it very well because I had some connection issues, but I think the question was essentially about who should set directionality to research and innovation activities, whether it should be bottom-up or top-down process, whether politicians or, I don't know, senior people in the research funding agencies are the best people to, you know, to decide where this research should go and who should participate. I think the right approach is to have a little bit of both, because we, in the past, we try to have more bottom-up approach. Simply, research stakeholders would define what to do, and we didn't necessarily see that activities were contributing to this societal, you know, addressing societal challenges. So I think that certain direction should be set by maybe by politicians setting priorities, and policymakers, you know, identifying the problems to be solved, and then we need the community. And I would again kind of call it community of practice in Nexus, and in our case in WEFE Nexus, a platform for different stakeholders to work together and identify important issues, agree on who does what, and work, you know, setting consortia to work together on projects, on both research projects and demonstration, and you know, close to the market projects, and it may be very flexible structure. Different people participating in different activities, but with this understanding of what the challenge is, and interest in developing solutions that are effective, fair, participatory, etc. So for me, co-creation and community of practice are kind of two important concepts in the Nexus approach.
Okay, final thought, Isidro, from you, because I know at the UFM, the Union for the Mediterranean, you're Deputy Secretary General for Water and Energy, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this next panel at 14:15 CET. You must be pretty excited about talking about that.
Well, the first reflection has to be, let me be honest, I am the Deputy Secretary General for Water, Environment and Blue Economy, not for energy. But anyway, in some way we are interlinked with climate. We notified that, but it hasn't been changed in the program. Sorry, it's our fault maybe. Okay, so no, but we work closely with our section devoted to climate, and indeed, we have developed since the last year a very deep cooperation with the FAO and CIHEM on the food system in the Mediterranean. So we are working on that. We are very active on water issues. We are now working for the 4th Mediterranean Water Forum, which will take place in Malta at the end of the year. So we have our agenda full of activities, putting all our countries together and listening to all of them, because every country has a different sensitivity, and we have to listen to them from the bottom up, and then to take decisions from the top down.
That's right. It takes both directions. Angelo,
both directions.
Final word from you, from the Prima Foundation, please.
Thank you.
No, I think that thanks for this very fruitful conversation. I think that it is great to see such an alignment towards the idea that we work together both in the Nexus and with the community of practices. So I think that that's a great sign for the future. Back to you, Chris.
Okay, thanks so much. Our thanks to Yanis, who had to leave a bit early, to Angelo, to Isidro, to Pavel, to Stefano. Thank you so much, and thanks for everyone for watching and for sending in your questions on this this WEFE Nexus conference. The next session is at 14:15 CET. That Nexus Talk 1 on water and energy approaches. So if you heard anything during this session that you'd like to cast further, please do on the hashtag WEFE Nexus. My name is Chris Burns. Thanks for watching.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, good to see you all. We are able to be seen by the audience as well. So I'll just do a quick check-in to make sure that everybody's happy. Theodoros, lovely to see you. Jawad, lovely to see you too. Pedro, looking forward to your keynote speech. Rabi, I think we have a full house. And Divian, fantastic. And you all look bright and ready to go and ready to fire, which is terrific. As far as I know, until I'm given the start, we are already on camera. So we will just warm up the audience as well as warming up ourselves. Perhaps each one of you would like to, I'll do it in the order that you're on. So Pedro, if you'd like to just make 3 of your main messages for what you're going to be saying.
Okay, let me think about it. I would say that first we need to change our energy systems in order to reduce the threat of climate change. Second, that is going to have a lot of implications on food systems, water systems. And the third message is we need to be able to translate these challenges into opportunities for a more sustainable development.
Very succinct, absolutely brilliant. Thank you. I may ask you all to do that at the end again, just before we finish the whole session, just to round up your ideas.
Let me know those. I'll go into note those out.
No, you said it beautifully. If you can say the same, that would be brilliant. So our first speaker is Rabi. So Rabi, 3 of your main messages, nice and clearly, would be great.
Good morning, good afternoon. I will be focusing on Eastern Mediterranean. I would look at the nexus between water, energy, food, and make sure that any technology that we're promoting would not impact negatively the land allocation and water for food. And then I'll be talking about some of the barriers and some of the capacity that needs to be built in order to promote a transition to renewable energy, focusing on the capacity building and the infrastructure in the region.
Terrific. That's nice and succinct. Gosh, we could have a 5-minute conference because you're all so clear. That's wonderful. Theodoros, you are from the Institute anyway. You work with Nick, so you know everything. But I'd love to hear your messages.
Thank you, Renee. Good afternoon and good morning to everyone. Yes, obviously I don't know everything, but building on Pedro's presentation, I think, and Ravi's intervention, I will probably outline the need to have systems thinking and systems approaches, which are by definition necessary if we are talking about the Nexus, and perhaps try to very briefly identify why some of the major European funding schemes may be tilted perhaps towards more only one-sided perhaps technological approaches and not necessarily systems approaches that would be particularly important for the Mediterranean and the Nexus, with some examples from and ideas how to link them with the Sustainable Development Goals in order to promote this systems approach, this framework to support policy makers with scientific advice.
Great, thank you. All of you have your eye on the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. Thank you for that. And Divyam, you are next. 3 messages. Yeah, we've got about 3 minutes left till we start, so we'll warm up.
Take 30 seconds. So I think the first message is, as Pedro said, the energy transition has to happen, and it's already underway, particularly in the power sector. The renewable energy brings opportunities within the energy system, but also for the water sector to improve access to affordable, reliable energy, but also in the food sector. And number 3, as was mentioned earlier, systems thinking, nexus thinking can really help manage some of the trade-offs associated with the energy transition, but also maximize the benefits for SDGs and
Great, so that's a win-win. That's great. Thank you very much, Divyam. And last, but certainly not least, Jawad, and you are new into this because you jumped in very kindly at the last moment. So your 3 messages, possibly.
Yeah, thank you, Renee. So from my perspective, I think the Nexus approach can help us achieve significant economic gains, but we need to demonstrate this to those stakeholders. So for the approach to secure financing, robust institutional structures are needed. It's also important to boost innovative financial instruments and data availability, which is important, data availability and sharing. So as well as to implement economic instruments, the integrated economic approach to be able to measure the impact of Nexus into economy and employment. And finally, I think there are many regional initiatives and the organization working on the Nexus and its implementation. But I think still some coordination should be set up to harmonize effort, avoid duplication, and multiply the benefits.
Thank you all, and thank you audience for tuning in, because we will now officially start. So hello and welcome, and we hope you're enjoying the conference so far. This is the first round table of the Water Energy Food Ecosystem, or WEFE Nexus. And of course, you can ask questions as well. This session is called Renewables-Based Energy Water Approaches as Enablers for Development. The Mediterranean region is suffering more than other parts of the world with exceptionally high effects of climate change. It's warming up dangerously fast here. We only have to look at recent fires in France, Spain, and Greece to see some of the threats. And of course, this is just the beginning. So instead of standing with our feet in the water, watching the sea levels rising, we're going to face the problems head on in this session and find some solutions. We'll be looking at the energy transition in the Mediterranean, the links to water, the challenges, opportunities, and implications for the Nexus by using science and technology-based solutions in dealing with resistance to climate change. My name is Rini Wyndham. I'm a journalist and I'm your moderator for this session. I have a great pleasure too. We have a highly qualified panel, as you can see in front of you already, for our discussion, and we'll also be welcoming questions from you, the audience, which you can relay in the questions section in your tab on the right, and they will be relayed to me by the excellent team that's backing up this session. First, we'll be hearing from our keynote speaker, and then from each of the four panelists, and finally taking your questions. Our keynote speaker is Pedro Linares, Professor of Industrial Engineering at Comillas Pontificia University in Madrid. Hello, Pedro. Rabi Mokhtar is the first panelist, Dean of the Faculty of Agricultural and Food Sciences at the American University of Beirut and founder of A&M's Water Energy Food Nexus. Hi, Rabi.
Hello.
Theodoros Zachariadis, who works at the Cyprus Institute as Associate Professor in the Energy, Environment and Water Research Center. Hello, Theodoros.
Hello to everyone.
Divyan Nagpal from IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency based in Abu Dhabi. Hello, Divyan.
Hello.
And Jawad El-Haraz, Senior Consultant and Advisor on Water, Energy and Climate for many international institutions. Hello, Jawad.
Hello, everyone.
So first, a bit of background, some of which you already know, I'm sure. The Mediterranean Sea has been the center of Western civilization for centuries. Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Moorish empires all thrived around it. And this small sea contains just 1% of the planet's ocean water, yet the Mediterranean contains 8% of the world's biodiversity, which is currently under threat. The sea is also degraded by overfishing, unregulated tourism, aquaculture, oil drilling. About 200 chemical, petrochemical and energy plants are found along the coastline. Just a few more facts and figures. By 2035, energy consumption in the world will increase by 50% on what it is now, and the energy sector will need 85% more water than it does now. There are 21 countries plus 5 autonomous territories bordering the Mediterranean, which itself covers almost 1 million square miles. Africa, Asia, and Europe all have countries which border it. But the socioeconomic problems in each country are very different. For instance, in the eastern and southern Mediterranean, There's more high youth and female unemployment, poverty, low quality education, and underdeveloped infrastructure. Parts of the area are fragile and parts are unstable politically. For instance, in Lebanon, there's an energy crisis and no stable electricity. Various deals have recently been put in place. For example, last year's IUCN Marseille Manifesto, which committed to reducing biodiversity loss and working to mitigate climate change. And the most recent, the Athens Agreement, about 10 days ago, containing pledges in key areas of the climate crisis. A good start, but are they enough? The demand for energy in most countries continues to rise, and energy is intimately related to the availability of water. We'll be hearing how water, energy, and food are inextricably linked, and why it's vital that Mediterranean countries plan for the future in keeping with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The good news is that rather than looking just at problems, our panelists will be discussing how science proposes positive solutions for the future. To give us a professional overview of the whole situation in the Mediterranean, I have a great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Pedro Linares. Pedro has a deep knowledge of the subject. He's Professor of Industrial Engineering at Comillas University Pontificia in Madrid, as well as being Director of the BP Chair on Energy and Sustainability. I could go on, he has a great list of qualifications, but it's more important to hear what Pedro has to say. He'll be talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, the challenges, opportunities, and policy implications of energy transition. So without further delay, I'm looking forward to hearing your keynote speech for this session. Welcome, Pedro Linares.
Unmute. Thank you, Renee, for your very kind introduction. And let me solve this. Oops. Okay, I have a problem. Okay, I have a new computer. I'm going to get out and back again in a moment.
Okay. While we're waiting, I'll just recap on your subject so that people are primed for what you're going to be talking about, Pedro. I hope you come back nice and soon. What you'll be talking about is the Sustainable Development Goals, the challenges, opportunities, and policy implications of the energy transition that we're discussing today. And oh, you've come back. No, yeah. Wait, yes, okay, you have. Excellent, good.
Yeah, the only thing I need is permission to share my screen, and then I'll be able to get it.
Okay, somebody will get you there, I'm sure. We have a superb backup team.
Okay, yeah.
You have permission to share.
Thank you so much. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Okay, so here we go, and thank you so much first for your introduction, as I said, Renee, and thank you so much to the organizers for allowing me to share my views on this, I think, really important topic, which is the energy transition in the Mediterranean and the challenges and opportunities that this raises. So I'm going to be quite quick. I just want to provide some context to the really interesting insights that our panelists are going to provide us. So let me start right on. I think all of you know that we are already undergoing a very significant energy transition in order to reduce our carbon emissions. We are obliged, we need to do this energy transition basically because if we continue under the current path of using fossil fuels, we will make basically our planet an unlivable place. So if we want to constrain the climate change to the limits that seem reasonable, like the 1.5 degrees Celsius target installed in the Paris Agreement, we need to significantly transform our energy systems. This picture that you see here comes from the IPCC report, and you can see the extent of the transformation that we need to go through. We need to basically change the way we heat and cool our buildings. We need to change the way in which we move. We need to change the technologies that we use to produce goods. We need to change the power system, right? And this, of course, the extent of this change is sometimes dramatic. This again is taken. You don't probably see the numbers, but I'm going to summarize them for you. This comes from the IPCC report, and this basically shows that we need to reduce 90% the amount of coal that we use. We need to reduce 90% the amount of oil, and we need to increase renewables in our systems up to 80% compared to previous numbers. So you see that the transformation is deep and radical, right? This indication from the IPCC is replicated in many different scenarios that people are producing, like the International Energy Agency or BP or ARENA. I don't need to go through them, just to highlight that the transformation is huge, right? And this deep transformation is going to have significant impact on what we call the Nexus, which is the deep connection that exists between climate change, energy systems, water systems, and food and land systems. So just to illustrate what is the consequence that climate change is going to have on the energy system, you can see this diagram where we show that climate change has influence on temperature and rainfall and extreme events, and this in turn has an influence on water, and water has a significant influence on our energy resources, energy demand, or energy supply. So unless we address all these issues consistently and in an integrated way, we will not be able to solve the significant problems and the significant challenges that we face in this energy transition. And finally, to close up this integral view, we need to use Sustainable Development Goals as our indicators of outcomes, of progress. We cannot just use economic outcomes. We need to use all these indicators in order to evaluate whether we are actually going through this transition, this transformation in the right way. We cannot leave anybody behind. We cannot change our energy system while not addressing the jobs issue. We need to keep everything under the reasonable set of institutions. So as you see, all of this has to be also integrated, all these outcomes, in order to evaluate correctly whether we are doing the right thing or not. Okay. So let me just highlight some of the challenges that we face along this energy transition. So as you all know, and Renee has mentioned this, the Mediterranean is one of the regions in the world with where the problems with water availability are largest. So this was in 2010, this picture where we already know that there are some regions in the Mediterranean where water is an absolutely scarce resource, but there are many others where water is becoming this scarce resource. If you look at pictures, for example, that show what is going to be the evolution of this to 2050, what you see is that the Mediterranean region is full of red spots where water availability is going to have implications not only for the provision of water for health and for human consumption, but also for energy production. So in those places where we have hydropower, the availability of hydropower is going to be much reduced because of the influence of climate change. Also, energy demand is going to be changing. We have been experiencing for the last 30 or 40 years a reduction in the heating degree days. That is, the climate is becoming warmer, and that means that we need less energy for heating up our buildings or our homes. But on the other hand, and this is particularly significant for the Mediterranean region, the number of cooling degree days, that is the number of days where we need to cool our buildings, is increasing. And this, as I said, is particularly important for the Mediterranean. In fact, when you look at more detailed estimates for 2050, you see that many models predict increases of up to 30% in the cooling demands of buildings, unless, of course, we are able to change the way in which we design our buildings and the ways in which we are able to build in a more environmentally and climately respectful way. But climate and water are not going to be the only elements that are going to be affected. The way in which we produce our energy is also going to change. And as we all know, the energy transition means basically, as I mentioned before, that we're going to be producing much more of our energy through renewables. Like I would say that the two most important ones are photovoltaics and wind. Climate change is also going to have an influence on the production of photovoltaics. So, for example, if you look at this picture in Algeria or in Spain, we're going to see some changes in the amount of energy produced by photovoltaics. In general, we might expect that production would increase, right? Although with a significant degree of uncertainty. And in other countries or other regions like India, for example, production is expected to be reduced because of the higher temperatures. For winds, we also expect changes, but these changes, for example, in the case of Spain, are going to be negative. We expect a reduction in wind speeds, and this, unless we are able to transform our wind farms, our wind turbines, we're going to see a reduction in the amount of energy that can be produced by wind. So this is a challenge, given that we expect a lot from wind and solar in the coming years to run across this energy transition. But a new challenge that is appearing more and more, and this is a picture that I took just last week in a city in Spain, is that the more we rely on renewables, which, as we know, use a significant amount of land, the more opposition we're going to face, especially at the local level, unless we are able to do so in a constant dialogue, in a constant conversation with a lot of transparency. This graffiti that you see says basically more trees and fewer solar panels. In a region in Spain that is expected to be one of the leaders of renewable energy production. So when we deploy this huge amount of renewables, we need to be able to combine that with respect for the landscape, for the environment, and particularly for the perceptions of local populations. We also need to prepare for higher frequency of extreme events in the Mediterranean, like heat waves or droughts. These pictures come from the IPTS, one of the joint research centers in Europe, and you see that in Europe we are in the Mediterranean, sorry, we are actually very prone to suffering these extreme events. So we need to integrate this possibility with the way we are going to be using our water, our land, and our energy. Looking at the opportunity side, it seems that renewables are going to be a win-win solution, right? On the one hand, we are able to produce energy without carbon emissions, and on the other hand, most renewables don't require a lot of water. I say most because I'm talking about wind and photovoltaics. Some other renewable technologies do use a significant amount of water, like solar thermal or geothermal or hydroelectric. But I would also like to introduce the idea that photovoltaic or wind are not going to be the only technologies that we are going to need to undertake this energy transition. If you look at many estimates, power systems, electricity is only going to be able to supply 50% of our total energy needs, because we're going to be needing some other energy vectors to supply high temperature needs, for example, from industry. This is where hydrogen seems to be playing a larger role, but hydrogen also has many implications for water, for example, because basically right now, the green way to produce hydrogen is through electrolysis of water. So we need water to produce hydrogen, and hydrogen is going to be a high demand element in the transition. So of course, we need to address that issue. Another big opportunity is that by moving into a green economy, by moving into renewables, we seem to be able to create all these green jobs that are being touted all around, right? And green jobs seem to be an opportunity to creating newer jobs, more qualified jobs that will substitute those jobs linked with fossil fuel industries or with old industries. But again, this has to be done in the right way. in order to create those green jobs, we need to address all the value chain, like this graph says. This is taken for the International Labour Organization. And we see that we need to be able to combine all the value chain elements so that the green jobs will actually be there instead of just having the technology, the installations. And again, this has a lot to do with the issue that I mentioned before about public acceptability of renewables. If people see that renewables are creating jobs locally, they will probably be more acceptable of these developments. And again, it's not only jobs, it's not only the economy, we also need to address institutions and participation in the economy, as mentioned before in the Sustainable Development Goals. Finally, of course, there are many opportunities that we can address, and I'm sure that all the panelists are going to be doing that. But I think we also need to look at the need to address all these issues in a systematic, integral way. So we need to advance in joint planning. This is just an example of an exercise we did a couple of years ago about what happens when we plan energy and water together. And basically what we see is that the results of planning independently or planning jointly are absolutely different in terms of the investments that need to be made, on where those investments have to be made. And of course, if we fail to do this planning jointly, the mistakes that we are going to be facing are huge. So given that most of the investments that we need to undertake in order to run the energy transition have to take place in the coming 10 years, I think this is a very important issue for policy. We need to convince policymakers that joint planning and systemic thinking is fundamental in order to undertake this energy, climate, water, food, energy transition. The last issue that I would like to make is that fortunately there is a significant amount of money waiting to be invested in this energy, water, food transition. In Europe, we have the Next Generation funds. In other places, we have the Green Climate Fund, auspiciated by the Paris Agreement and the United Nations. So I think that right now is the right moment to set up these joint plans, these integrated plans, and present them to the financiers so that we can jumpstart this transition in the right way. So in order to finalize my context, my presentation, I would like to leave the panelists with this important question, which is, how are we going to be able to turn those challenges that I mentioned into the significant opportunities that we foresee to make this transition, this energy transition, into a truly sustainable development opportunity? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pedro. That was very comprehensive indeed, as a very good start, and also quite uplifting and bringing quite a bit of hope. On the green jobs subject, I must say that the green jobs seem to be far more interesting than people going down mines or drilling on oil platforms. It's much more interesting to insulate homes or plant trees or do photovoltaics. So once green jobs are underway, people will really see an uplift in morale as well as on the planet. Thank you very much for that. There will be lots of questions for you later, I'm sure. But we now welcome the first of our panelists, Rabi Mokhtar. Rabi founded the University of Beirut's Water, Energy, Food, Health Nexus Renewable Resources Initiative. He's Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture and Food Sciences at the American University of Beirut, the AUB, and he's got countless publications to his name. So it's a pleasure to learn more about the water, food, energy nexus in the Mediterranean at first hand from you, Rabi. You're going to be describing a modelling framework for this and also highlighting challenges, opportunities and policy implications, majoring on water security. Rabi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you, Pedro, for the great overview. I will be focusing on the Eastern Mediterranean, and we'll start with some of the, building on what Pedro mentioned, the prerequisite for adopting this energy transition within the existing energy portfolio. by understanding how this new portfolio will interface with different energy users and other resources, and also by recognizing the impact of the new portfolio on other primary resources of water, land, and agriculture. Food security is a major issue, at least in the Eastern Mediterranean, and I'd like to highlight that because it will have both positive and possibly negative implication with this energy transition, so we need to be mindful of that. And I would also highlight the evaluation and the role of this new transition of portfolio in expanding the distributed energy access to rural areas, which is very important, that the previous centralized energy production system prevented electrification of. Last but not least in this prerequisite is to set up a renewable energy readiness plan that includes financial, technological, social, and policy factors. I'll be talking a little bit about this later in my short intervention. As far as looking at building also on what Pedro mentioned about this system approach, a framework for achieving a national renewable energy target in the Mediterranean and particularly in Eastern Mediterranean, we need to work through the barriers to achieve the renewable energy targets. One of those main barriers that I see is the local capacity for research and development. That is lacking, and this I think would be a major bottleneck in further deployment of renewable energy because it's expensive, because most of this technology is imported. So we need to create a culture of innovation and promote manufacture and industry that will make this affordable. And then the other enabling or looking at the barriers is the enabling policies. Those are the energy pricing valuation, and I'm sure my colleagues will talk about this a bit more, the energy public awareness and education, and the incentive framework that is needed for local industries. The other thing that I'd like to put on the table, which is not discussed extensively, is the regional integration and infrastructure, looking into mapping renewable energy potential across the region. I think there need to be a regional view. We tend to be looking at national boundaries, and I think in this case, a regional view is certainly needed. In terms of readiness, the issues of infrastructure is also need to be highlighted in terms of natural resources, country overall infrastructure, grid capacity, market and electricity access rate, and projected. The institutional capacity needs to be looked at, and the human capital in general that allow for the technical and commercial skills of technology adoption and diffusion. So if you look at the overall barriers, we could classify them into bureaucracy and inefficient institution, lack of policy, but most importantly is the subsidies of the electricity and fossil fuel. Renee, you mentioned Lebanon. Lebanon is a good example of what not to do in the energy sector. And I will later on, I will close with some potential for this, for the country. So keeping with the spirit of the Nexus that we all are discussing in this conference, the sustainability of the technology needs to be assessed at the 6 different aspects, looking at the modeling of this transition. The first is the primary resources requirement and needs of water, energy, and food. This has been also highlighted by Pedro, but we need to look at this as a major element of how we choose our energy transition by looking at the footprint of water, energy, and food. Of course, the economic and financial requirement is important, but also the environmental and ecological aspect, as well as the human capacity requirement and the need to develop and operate and maintain the technology of choice. The technical feasibility and the requirement, I think there are the options are go broader than PV and solar, depending on what the needs are. If the needs are for agriculture, there are a lot of other factors in bioenergy that can be explored without looking at the first criteria that I mentioned, which is the not to be interfacing or not to be negatively impacting the water and food sector. Last but not least, we also have to be mindful of the social and cultural outlook of the technology of choice. And there's a lot of things that we could discuss here. Maybe we can follow up with that in the Q&A. I'll give one example in Lebanon. In Lebanon, 1/3 of the country's energy supply could be hydropower. We've been blessed with both in-stream and several mini hydropower generation that could be supplying the country with a significant amount of energy. However, implication on irrigation and rural water supply needs to be considered. So in closing, I'd like to highlight that the growth in renewable energy deployment has to be supported with a consideration of the positive and negative impact on other sectors. Renewable energy technology must be localized and require more planning and investment in many areas. Renewable energy plans should be viewed as an integrated solution between water, energy, and land, and of course, food. Renewable energy stimulates the food sector in many, many ways, both at the production, processing, and the distribution, and that needs to be looked at. That has, as mentioned earlier, directly impact water security, and can ease the stresses and potential trade-off between water, energy, and food. Overall, these dynamics of renewable energy presents both opportunities and challenges in the region, and we need to look at specifically how it interfaces with energy, water, and food security in the Eastern Mediterranean. Last but not least, a holistic framework is needed, looking at human capacity, which we lack in the region, policies which we lack, and institutional resources which we lack. So these are bottlenecks that needs to be looked at as we look for additional penetration of the renewable in the energy sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rabi. That was very constructive indeed. I like the way you looked at what the barriers were and then found your ideas for solutions, like creating a culture of innovation, regional infrastructure, and incentive for local industries. That's all very positive. And thank you for those ideas. We'll develop them further, I hope, later if there's time. Our next speaker is Theodoros Zachariadis. Theodoros works at the Cyprus Institute. He's an associate professor in the Energy, Environment and Water Research Center. He has a doctorate in mechanical engineering from Thessaloniki University in Greece, and he won 2 prizes, the Research Prize and the Environmental Prize, from the President of the Republic of Cyprus. So we look forward, Theodoros, highlighting economic recovery measures post-pandemic. You're looking a bit at what the pandemic has brought and how we're coming out of it, the importance of linking recovery investments with UN Sustainable Development Goals. So, Theodoros, your turn.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you very much. To build on something that Rabi has just mentioned, the need for a holistic framework and for regional cooperation in the Mediterranean in places where we are lacking resources and capacity. This reminds me of the findings that we made in the frame of the so-called Cyprus Climate Change Initiative for the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East. I was among the people who were responsible for the energy report, mapping the situation and identifying gaps in knowledge and gaps in regional cooperation. And of course, connecting this with water issues, providing a policy toolkit to jointly address the decarbonization challenges in the water and energy aspects in the region. We will be presenting these findings very soon in a conference next month, which will be in a hybrid format. But we have identified exactly these issues, and with the aid also of people from the International Renewable Energy Agency, we are highlighting in the report the need for these holistic frameworks. Now, the issue, of course, is that if we talk about holistic frameworks, sometimes we run the risk of going so broadly that policymakers may not know what to prioritize. So since it's clear that as in the world, we are living beyond the boundaries of our planet. And as Pedro has shown, we need decarbonization of unprecedented scale and speed. This means that in the scientific and technological domain, we need to provide policymakers with trusted and actionable knowledge. So practical, pragmatic approaches that can help policymakers apply this framework as holistic as it can be. Now, touching upon the focusing on the two last slides of Pedro's presentation, he said in his last slide that we have now the resources, both the EU funds, but also the Global Climate Fund, the Green Climate Fund. And in the slide before last, he mentioned the benefits of joint planning for energy and water. Now, this reminds me of the following. It is true that in Europe, we are now enjoying the possibility through this Next Generation EU program, but also through the regular EU budget, to mobilize perhaps unprecedented financial resources at EU level for the green transition. And this is extremely important. It is especially important for South European countries, which are all Mediterranean. And of course, the rest of the Mediterranean, the non-European Mediterranean countries may not have access to such resources, but how the richer parts of this region make use, design and implement such projects may provide insights into how other countries can also benefit from even more limited available funds. So the recovery and resilience plans that were recently submitted by all or almost all EU governments and adopted, most of them already, by EU leaders, and which have started already providing finance to South European Mediterranean countries, which are now of interest to us, contain a very large number of green actions. Of course, we have analyzed, together with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network Europe, the extent to which these green investments are in line with the broader sustainable development goals. And this already provides an indication on whether there is a systemic approach in these funding processes. Well, we have found out that in most countries, and of course in all South European Mediterranean countries, there is a very large technological aspect of the green investments that are foreseen. They are not necessarily taking into account all different aspects of the nexus. The Mediterranean European countries are planning large investments in renewable energy, large investments in expanding and modernizing electricity grids and railway grids, electrifying vehicles. But these do not necessarily translate to systemic investments that would enable, for example, joint planning of energy and water challenges. Of course, the European Union leaders have adopted a framework with which all these investments should do no significant harm, as it is called, to other environmental objectives. So that, for example, expanding on renewables would not be against biodiversity or nature protection or against circular economy considerations. But doing no significant harm does not mean also improving the different aspects. For example, we have plenty of evidence in several recovery plans of EU countries and Mediterranean countries particularly, who are enjoying a large part of these funds, that there are some sustainability objectives which are also part of the WEFE Nexus that are probably overlooked. For example, if we focus on the Sustainable Development Goal 2, which is whose short title is Zero Hunger, but of course it does not only involve hunger, but it involves also sustainable agriculture, nutrition, and the way that our agri-food system operates. There you could see in the recovery plans of Italy, Spain, Greece, and Cyprus, which we have looked into, very few actions that would improve this aspect of sustainability in agriculture, minimizing the environmental impacts, or changing towards more healthy lifestyles in the food system. There are several investments that address the nexus, for example, more energy efficient irrigation networks, or water distribution networks, or a limited amount of investments in marine renewable energy in Spain, for example, or using agricultural waste to produce energy through biogas, which would reduce also water pollution from this agricultural waste. There are such investments, but there are aspects that are overlooked. So the Sustainable Development Goals can really provide the framework within which the water, energy, food ecosystems nexus can be monitored properly, and there are practical ways to aid policymakers in this. So this is important both in the ex-ante planning of new public and private investments, but also in the ex-post assessment of where each country of the Mediterranean is heading towards sustainability. I think this is a pragmatic approach that can help address the nexus. I may have exceeded my time, so I think I will stop here. Thank you for listening.
No, you didn't exceed your time, Theodoros. That was very interesting indeed, and also quite right. To think of all these countries trying to pull together when they're coming from totally different areas is a real problem. And I'm glad you highlighted the difference between not doing harm and actually improving the situation, which again is worth listening to. And as you say, we need to address decarbonisation at speed. I don't know if this is being done, but that's what we should be doing. So thank you for highlighting all those points, Theodoros. I hope we can discuss more fairly soon. We now come to our next speaker, who is Divyam Nagpal. Divyam works for IRENA, which is almost my name, the International Renewable Energy Agency, and Digmal is Programme Officer for Energy Access at the Policy and Finance Centre. He's also been a consultant for the MIT Initiative Global Commission to End Energy Poverty, very appropriately. Having worked in the UK and in India on off-grid renewable energy projects, he has a wide grasp of renewables and energy efficiency. He's a mechanical engineer with an MSc from Imperial College in London, so lots of ideas for explaining IRENA's work on the water, energy, food nexus and how to transition to renewables. We heard from Rabi earlier about water security, and you're concentrating more on water for energy, Divyam. So your turn now. I'm looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you so much, Reen, and thank you to all the panelists for the very insightful presentation so far. So from from IRENA's perspective, I think from our very inception, what we've tried to do, we're a young intergovernmental organization, only about a decade old. And from our inception, we've always seen the energy transition or the renewable energy story as a holistic one, which doesn't happen standalone. It happens in tandem with other sectors and with impacts and ripple effects throughout the sectors. So as we've heard from a number of panelists today already, the energy transition is well underway. Is it happening fast enough? No, but definitely in the power sector, for example, we are seeing that for the past 7 years, the growth of renewables every year has far exceeded fossil fuels and nuclear combined. So definitely there is a shift that is taking place towards renewables within the energy sector, which has to be accelerated in line with the Paris Agreement. Now, even within the Mediterranean, as across the world, the motivations for different countries to pursue renewables is different. There is a combination of climate, there's a combination of access to electricity, clean cooking solutions. There is industrialization, where you want to provide reliable, affordable electricity for countries to industrialize. There is the jobs argument, as we discussed already in the renewable sector. Our IRENA estimations show that about 11.5 million people are working in the sector already. And it could be a great engine for job creation, particularly in countries with high youth unemployment moving forward. But of course, as has been mentioned before, when you transform one energy system, when you transform the energy system, that will have ripple effects across water and energies and the agriculture sector. So very briefly, just sort of some of the work that we've done on energy for water and water for energy. I just wanted to bring some numbers in. You know, when we look at water use for within the energy sector, you know, Pedro already mentioned that some technologies like solar PV and wind, they consume up to, you know, they consume very minimal amounts of water during the operational stage in generating electricity. There are some, of course, like bioenergy or CSP for that matter, that can be water intensive, which needs to be managed when their share grows within the energy system. But at a system level, we did two analysis a few years back, not specific to the Mediterranean, but I think can give quite good pointers in terms of what it means at a system level. You know, one was focused on India, where we looked at the NDC target for 2030, which was 40% non-fossil fuel capacity in power sector. And looking at the entire mix of the generation technologies, we found that with the growth of solar PV and onshore wind, on which much of the NDC target is to be met, in addition to hydro and bioenergy, water withdrawal intensity in the power sector actually reduces by 84%. This, of course, gets combined with improvements in water cooling technologies. So going from, you know, ones that are dependent on withdrawal to ones that are dependent on consumption. Similarly, water consumption intensity falls by 25%, carbon intensity falls by 43%. We did a similar analysis for China, and within the NDC, meeting their NDCs by 2030, we found that water withdrawal intensity falls by 42%, emissions intensity falls by 37%. So indeed, you know, looking at the systems perspective, you know, going towards less water intensive renewables does bring benefits for the water energy nexus. But of course, it may not mean that in absolute terms, you know, your water consumptions or water withdrawals reduce, because your energy system might continue to expand and grow in many of these countries. We're starting to see in some countries that are already doing energy, that are integrating water perspectives within their energy planning exercises and scenarios as well, adding a value to the water that the energy sector consumes, adding the water constraints for resilience. And I think that really is an important step to sort of starting to integrate some of those water constraints in energy policy making. Similarly, on the energy for water side, you know, looking at you know, large water utilities for whom energy is it's a pretty significant operational cost. You know, transitioning towards distributed renewables for pumping, for irrigation purposes. We're already seeing a lot of examples in Jordan, for instance. Similarly, desalination. You know, we heard that the region is among the least water resource ones in the world, and desalination itself is quite an energy-intensive process, where combining, you know, cost-effective solar PV with RO osmosis could offer a way forward together. Also looking at CSP applications, using desalination as storage in some ways. And finally, to sort of even focus on the agri-food chains, as it was mentioned, you know, 30% of the world's energy consumption happens in agri-food sector. So we cannot move towards a low carbon energy system without looking at an agriculture system, which consumes low carbon energy. And as Rabi mentioned, there's tremendous opportunities for decentralized renewables to get into agro-processing, for cold storage and reducing food losses, which can be explored, and for clean cooking as well. Finally, I just want to say that I think one of the big challenges for Nexus policy making and planning is data and information at the intersection of sectors. I can go to a UNST and get data on energy balances for every country. I can go to a FAO stat and get data on all the food sector consumption. But at the intersection, it's extremely difficult for me to identify energy use in agri-food value chains or energy use in water. So I will conclude here to say that you know, the energy transition brings tremendous amount of opportunities, but with planning, coordination, we can manage a lot of the trade-offs, but also maximize the benefits for the SDGs and for climate.
Thank you very much indeed, Divyam, and it's good that people are really noticing now that it's not just about creating energy, but about how much water it's using while you're trying to create it. Because all the emphasis in our media is about finding ways of creating renewable energy, but the water factor is not mentioned often enough. So that was really good analysis. Thank you so much. And our last speaker, who kindly stepped in very nobly at very short notice, is Dr. Jawad El-Kharas. Jawad is a senior water energy climate expert. He's senior consultant and advisor for a whole raft of international institutions. These include the European Commission, PRIMA, which is the Partnership for Research and Innovation in the Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean Water Institute. He studied sustainable desalination, we were talking about desalination, and has a doctorate in earth sciences from the Spanish University of Valencia. Jawad will give us some success stories of waste treatment, greenhouses producing food using desalination, and other positive news. And so we're looking forward to having a better slant on desalination from you, Jawad. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rini, for the kind introduction. We are gathered here not because it's becoming a la mode, because I have participated so many workshops and conferences on the Nexus, but because the security of water, energy, and food is really threatened in the Mediterranean. We are here because also the region is subject to many challenges that you mentioned, Rini, in your introduction, including water scarcity, environmental degradation, impact of climate change, unemployment, conflict, increased migration, etc. So tackling such issues using this water, energy, food, climate, ecosystem nexus is imperative to achieve political, social stability, economic recovery, gender equality, inclusion, food security, sustainable development. So many SDGs could be achieved if we really implement the nexus properly. So water security, energy security, and food security are very much linked, as you know. So any action in any one particular are often having effects on one or both or other areas. So we cannot try to ensure the security of one on the expense of another, but rather together, producing more food with less drops of water, consuming less energy. Some of the main barriers for implementation of the Nexus that we faced in the past in many initiatives are legislations, budget allocation, lack of collaborative coordination, lack of governmental incentives or proper governance, limited capacity of operators, and limited awareness to support Nexus investment. For example, who is going to pay for the joint planning, as mentioned by Pedro, or coordinating with other actors, or data sharing, and more coherent policies? So another concern is that clean energy transition is not properly managed. So that could increase water stress or be limited by it. So for the Nexus approach to secure financing, robust institutional structures are needed. In periods of increasing resource scarcity, when the Nexus approach is ignored, we have food costs that rise, electricity prices that increase, economic growth suffers. So a Nexus conceptual approach should take into consideration the scale of analysis and the existing institutional and policy framework. It should also consider the ways in which technology can improve the ability to achieve water and energy in a more efficient and integrated manner that is people-centered and based on human rights. It's also important to boost innovative financial instruments and data availability and the sharing, as well as to implement economic instruments and integrated economic approaches to measure the impact of Nexus into economy and employment. Traditionally, the private sector and governments have relied on engineered approaches, let's say, to secure energy, water, and food systems. However, this is becoming more difficult and less appealing from a finance perspective. Generally, Nexus investments can potentially be justified when they are profitable and low risk in terms of economic and social welfare regulated by the government, for example. So the PPPs, or the public-private partnership, although debatable, and other innovative financial mechanisms to support the sustainability of the destination schemes, for example, will likely be required and should be fostered, reinforced in consistent manner, providing a factor for either further increasing welfare or achieving the same goal more efficiently and cost effectively. An example of the financing Nexus are the PPPs project. So in the field of desalination, I can give the example of Agadir desalination project in Morocco. It started being operational, I think, 2 months ago. It will be producing by the end of the project 450,000 cubic meters per day. Half of it will be for irrigation, and the energy is indirectly taken from the CSP North solar plants. And I can also give another example, which is Khirbat al-Samra wastewater treatment plant in Jordan, which is using renewables, hydraulic energy, and biogas produced through anaerobic digestion. And the treated water is reused fully in agriculture. In fact, this plant is a good example of cost-effective performance since it operates at 18% of its operational budget. While we look at the world figures, it's around 25 to 40%. So the system had reduced CO2 emission by around 300,000 tons per year, and the effluent of the treatment plant, like 100 million cubic meters annually, is used for agricultural production. So this is another success story that I can highlight here. We can mention many other successful projects in the Mediterranean region, some funded by regional programs, such as PRIMA program, like the ones implementing integrated seawater and energy and agriculture system. We have many of these projects around the Mediterranean. On the other hand, solar desalination is becoming competitive. Is a good example of what's Energy Food Nexus, by the way. If combined with food production through greenhouses practices and other similar projects, this could contribute significantly to SDG 2, 6, and 7 at least. Renewable generation should be seen as valuable economic investment that reduce external social, environmental, and operational costs. Another example that I wanted to highlight also, Hydrosa project, which is led by the National Technical University of Athens. It goes beyond the current water and wastewater management practices. It adopts innovative, nature-based water management solutions for different types of water characterized by low energy footprints. I can mention also Minaret project, led by Royal Scientific Society in Jordan. It's a sort of model of next approach and renewable energy technologies with the aim to address the unique sustainability challenges and opportunities of the MENA region by increasing local and regional sustainability capacities using the synergies between renewables technologies and efficiency, water management, and food security. One and last example I want to also to highlight is the REGEN project by UNESCO, which is the regional initiative to promote small-scale renewable energy applications in rural areas in the Arab region, which aims to improve the livelihood, economic benefit, social inclusion, and gender equality of Arab rural communities, in particular marginalized groups, by addressing energy poverty, water scarcity, vulnerability to climate change, and other natural resources challenges. Appropriate small-scale renewables are used to conduct productive activities, support entrepreneurial developments, and ensure women's empowerment with an emphasis on creating jobs and developing robust value chains to promote sustainable economy. So what should be changed mainly in the Mediterranean is that policymakers ensure the integration of the policy cycle for the Nexus. This should be done by improving the governance of those vital sectors, which means adopting Nexus approach policymaking to increase policy coherence among the other sectors. In addition, the government should accelerate access to basic water and energy, engage and actively involve consumers to change behaviors, and create more with less, like improving productivity, accelerate energy transition as renewable technologies can boost water security by improving accessibility, affordability, and also safety. Finally, all those statements that I mentioned here are coming from different kind of regional initiatives that I was part of some of it, with a good number of actors like the Union for the Mediterranean, Prima Foundation, European Commission, Cyprus Institute, Casa Remena, GIZ, UNESCO, RICRI, IME, League of Arab States, FEAO, American University of Beirut, etc., etc. So still some coordination should be set up to harmonize efforts, avoid duplications of efforts, and multiply the benefits. And finally, with the increasing interest in green hydrogen as a future clean energy and accelerating energy transition, increasing renewables contribution to the energy mix, we may be called soon to consider seriously another Nexus, probably hydrogen water. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jawad. You covered an enormous amount, many countries and also many topics, and threw in green hydrogen at the end, which we might discuss with the panel shortly. Quite right about the coordination between the different nations, even if there are strategies within the countries, but coordinating all of them is yet another problem, and improving safety, accountability, and affordability. Also, you talked about who speaks for the rights, human rights, and we should also probably think who speaks for the rights of nature as well, because of biodiversity. We've got actually a raft of questions. I hope you, an audience watching, and there's lots of you, will also send in more questions, but we got quite a few already. I'll start with a question from Mike Jacobson, who says, why no comments on biofuels, good or bad? because of the graph showed the need for them to get to negative emissions. It was your graph, Pedro. So if you can answer that one, that would be great. Thank you, Mike, for your question.
Yeah, this is a great question, and probably we could be speaking about biofuels for a couple of months. In fact, you correctly point out that the IPCC and other scenarios demand the need for biofuels plus carbon capture as the only way to produce negative emissions and therefore arrive at the right amount of emissions. I guess the only two things that I would like to say is that, of course, the current generation of biofuels has a lot of problems. So we need to develop better biofuels that do not imply the several challenges to food production and land use that we have right now. And second, I personally am very critical about including biomass with carbon capture in scenarios, because this technology has a lot of issues that need to be solved. And therefore, in my view, when we introduce this type of technologies, we are kind of generating a kind of false expectative. For example, in the case of the Spanish strategy, the government decided against including CCS and biofuels, and instead relied only on natural sinks, which of course have other set of issues, but I think they are less controversial. So this would be my two very quick takes on this, which I agree is a really important issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pedro. I don't know if anybody else wants to answer that question, because we have several. I have one here from, yes, carry on, Rabi.
Yes, just very briefly, it's a great question. Thank you, Pedro, for a great response. I'd like, from an agriculture standpoint, I'd like to highlight two issues. Pedro mentioned the competition to food. I'd like to highlight that soil has been ignored in all of our discussion. I think the new generation of biofuel should include biochar, which has been proven to improve productivity of soil. It improves the water retention in many soils. And our new development, the scientific community in breaking the lignin, the cellulosic tissue, and generating energy from that is a huge improvement forward. And we need to look at expanding the bioenergy with the soil health in mind and the competition to food.
A very good point, Rabi. People have overlooked soil for far too long, and we've impoverished our soil beyond belief. So thank you so much for making that point. We have a question here from Shmuel Yerushalayim Lami, and he says, what do you think about the chance of future collaboration between Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Cyprus, and Egypt around the use of energetic potential of Mediterranean sea waves and shared construction of sea waves-based power stations? We'll start with, well, Jawad, perhaps.
Could you please, just the last part of the question? I didn't
yes, I'll say that again. What do you think about the chance of a collaboration between Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Cyprus, and Egypt? That'll be a question for a couple more as well, around the use of the energetic potential of the Mediterranean Sea's waves and shared construction of sea. So it's about sea energy and power stations. Is there a potential to share?
Thank you. I'm not sure I'm the right person to respond to this question. And firstly,
Rabi,
because
perhaps
it has a political dimension, and secondly, because I know that I am in collaboration with some companies that work or promote wave energy in the oceans. So it's more in the oceans, in the Mediterranean. I'm not sure of the potential of using the sea waves of the Mediterranean in these particular areas of the Mediterranean.
Okay, we'll keep politics out of it because this is a science debate. But Divyan or Rabi, have you a solution there? Divyan is nodding, so you, Divyan.
No, I think on ocean energy broadly, I think it's I do not have a context specific answer to the question, but broadly, I think there's a lot of innovation happening around that side, but definitely there's a long journey that is yet to be covered in terms of being matched with some of the other renewables that are much more mature.
Rabi?
I am familiar with small-scale pumps, hydro pumps that use the wave energy. I'm not familiar with the large scale of that scale that has been proven to work economically, but it's certainly something to explore.
Thank you. We've got a follow-on question there from Tiziana Della Ragione, who says, and I don't want you to be political either, what can the panel suggest to promote the cooperation between Israel and Jordan, knowing that there's no electricity grid interconnection yet? Who is going to pay for this type of joint nexus? How is it going to be managed and financed? Theodoros, I haven't come to you yet, but I think you might have an idea.
Not really. These are among the gaps that we have identified in our report for the Cyprus Climate Initiative. But this question is too specific for me about financing this specific interconnection. We can see the benefits, but of course someone has to finance it, of course. But sorry,
anybody feel that they have a more specific answer in the group?
I can just mention the example of a similar the Red Sea project, that was planned in the past, which was a collaboration between Jordan and Israel to bring water from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea and build desalination plants and produce like 50 million cubic meter for Jordan, 30 million for Israel. So after a long years, World Bank feasibility studies and other actors, finally it was, it stopped there. So this kind of project obviously has a political weight. So once it's solved politically, maybe technically it will not be an issue.
Thank you, Jawad. We have an anonymous question here which says, for Pedro, something's gone wrong on my computer. I hate computers. It has blocked the question, but it was, there we go. People always assume that renewables are taking place, but the Mediterranean is full of flat roofs, Pedro, and including here where we are in the south of France. I've asked people, why don't they use photovoltaics on the roofs? No answer. So what is the problem? Why aren't we having more photovoltaics on Mediterranean roofs?
Again, this is a very contested issue, but if I'm allowed to answer very quickly, it's basically about cost. I agree that if I had to choose independently of cost, the best option for deploying PV is roofs. Right. It's the option that creates the lowest environmental impacts. It doesn't create disconflicts with land use and therefore doesn't create a negative perception by the population. But the problem is that it's significantly more costly because basically you cannot access economies of scale that you enjoy when you get to a big farm. So it's a trade-off that we need to think about. I think what is important here is to provide society with the right information and then jointly make the right decision. And of course, if we are happy to pay a little bit more, I would be glad to move into rooftop PV because I think it has many advantages. And TVM also.
TVM, your turn.
Just to piggyback on that, I think the cost issue is an important barrier, and we're already seeing examples of tailored financing products that the governments are trying to provide to facilitate adoption of rooftop PV, or even, for example, solar water heaters, which are quite common in the region. So an example is WEFE in Jordan, where they have a dedicated funding line for rooftop PV applications, not just for households, but also schools, for example. So I think tailored financing products for these can really address some of the financing challenges that Pedro mentioned, which keep it from scaling up.
It's funny, it seems that so many areas have such good ideas but the good ideas don't seem to be spreading, as Jawood mentioned earlier. If people pooled all these good ideas, then possibly the thing would lift much more. You touched on, at the end of your speech, Jawad, you were talking about hydrogen as a potential solution for energy in the Med. Could you expand more on hydrogen?
Yes, I mean, now if you look at the region, almost all the countries are trying to develop their national policy on the green hydrogen. And there is even agreements, for example, signed between Morocco and Germany, Morocco and Korea. Also, I know in Egypt, in Jordan, many other countries are developing this strategy. And to produce this green hydrogen, we need like 9 kilos of water of high quality. And in a region of scarce water resources, this is actually a big challenge. So that's why I mentioned that this Nexus hydrogen, water, climate may be, be a topic of probably next workshop, because how can we, find a way to produce the green hydrogen without, not on the expense of those scarce water resources. Obviously, at R&D level, there is a lot of efforts. I know some labs working on trying to produce the green hydrogen from seawater, but it's still very challenging. We are talking about the lab scale. So to upscale it to it's still, I think it needs some years. So for the moment, it's there's different kind of probably approaches. Some people talk about desalination. So building more and more desalination plants. The cost is decreasing because, as already mentioned probably by Divyam, so we have now more and more coupled renewable energy with desalination. So some renewables can power desalination plants. So that's obviously decrease. It's make desalination as a sustainable solution, but for the excess of the desalinated water produced, we can maybe use it for green hydrogen production. But still, obviously, it's challenging because the price of the cubic meter has decreased considerably compared to 20 years ago, but it's still not that that cheap, because other options like reusing wastewater, treated wastewater, is still cheaper. So I think there's still a margin to improve at the R&D level, and let's see what will happen in the upcoming years.
Wouldn't the price come down if it was used more widely?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I know that at level of R&D there is margin of improvement at the level. For example, RO technology, we can still improve the membrane quality. We can still improve the energy recovery devices. We can still, use some hybrid processes in order to improve the recovery of the system, etc., etc. But that's why I'm saying that I'm optimistic vis-a-vis next year. The cost is still will decrease. Yeah.
Great, Rabi. Yes.
Yeah, may I have a follow-up question to Jawad and to Pedro? Technology provider for hydrogen energy claim that a lot of that water that is used in the generation is claimed back in the system. So the net water use is not as much as we would assume. It's much less. What would you say?
Pedro, want to start?
Yes.
You mean about you're referring to the hydrogen production process?
That's correct. I mean, a lot of that water that's used initially is retrieved back in pure water after condensation. So the net water use in the energy production for hydrogen is not very high. That's at least from the literature.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with that. So maybe Jawad may say something more about it.
Jawad, and then we have one quick question before time is running out. So quite quick.
Okay, well, quickly. What I know is up to now the estimation is 9 kilograms. Of water is needed to produce, one kilogram of hydrogen. But the thing is that if we still can pick up or recover some water, it will not be of drinkable quality. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it needs some additional treatment. So we're talking about electrolysis, which is the most easiest way to produce green hydrogen right now. But I cannot maybe give you deeper response. I think it's something to investigate further.
Okay, we're the last question, which I'll do as my roundup as well, is a question from Nihat Ader, who says, what are the opinions about nuclear power plants which are being built and planned and constructed in some East Mediterranean countries? If each of you can give me just a sentence, because we do have to hurry. I'll start with Theodoros.
It's a little bit a difficult question because on the one hand, the rich countries in the Mediterranean and in Eastern Mediterranean especially, or if we include the Middle East, could possibly afford full decarbonization of the energy systems only with renewables. At the same time, currently renewable energy accounts for a very small fraction of total energy use. So if we are talking about seriously decarbonizing the energy systems by 2030 and 2050, I think it is difficult to imagine this without some nuclear. But
okay, sorry to cut you short. I need a quick quote from everybody, otherwise we will be finishing late. Divyam?
Sure. I think I can guide you to, Irina's recent World Energy Transitions Outlook, which got launched, which sort of looks at the 2050 framework for primary energy supply and where nuclear fits in. But I think definitely today with the renewable energy power options around solar PV and wind, I think there's a very strong business case for rapid rollout of these solutions in a quick period of time to meet decarbonization objectives.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being quick. Rabi, what do you think?
I would be only concerned about the water for cooling. The traditional nuclear power plant requires extensive amount of cooling water. So that should be an element that needs to be considered in the energy portfolio if we go in that direction.
Thank you. Jawad.
I wanted to say the same what Rabi said, because I know that in almost power plants we need this cooling water. And sometimes whenever we have like alga bloom or something like that in the sea, it's an issue for the power plants. So the cooling water definitely should need to be considered.
Thank you. And finally, Pedro.
I would point you to a study we run on an integrated water and energy planning for Spain. And what we found is, first, nuclear wasn't competitive in economic terms, and second, when we pushed it to get into the system, we found that we could only build it in the wettest regions, which are not the Mediterranean ones. Of course, unless you site them close to the ocean, close to the Mediterranean, where you can have kind of cheap cooling water, but then you have the issues that Jawad has mentioned. So I'm not very optimistic about the prospects of nuclear.
Oh, well, we'll try to end on a slightly more positive note, because a lot of the information all five of you have given has been very positive, very constructive. I've learned a lot and it's been a fantastic session. Of course, there is another way to solve our problems, and that is by waiting 50 million years, because at that point, the Mediterranean Sea will have disappeared. The continental drift means that Africa and Europe are slowly colliding, and there'll be just one mega continent in 50 million years' time, Eurafrica, so no more Mediterranean. That's one solution. Anyway, we have not much more time, but thank you so much to our very qualified and interesting panel, to Pedro for your keynote speech, to Rabi, Theodoros, Divyam and Jawad. Thank you all. I'd also like to thank the organizers, who you can't see behind the scene, although we did get a brief view of one just now, the technicians, the interpreters, Antonella, our backstage shadow Pavlos Tsiarastas, and especially to Nick Jarreau, who's put heart and soul into all these sessions and been a wonderful support. Also to the brains behind the whole conference, Giovanni Bidolio. And in 15 minutes after the break, you'll be able to join our poster session. You can look on the website, or you can look on your program and click on the poster that you're interested in. We have 2 more days on this conference. Tomorrow it'll start again with a poster session at 9:45, followed by a plenary at 11:45. And we'll be finding out how positive solutions from scientists, politicians, and people on the ground could ensure that biodiversity in the Mediterranean flourishes and the area is resilient to climate change. So wherever you are watching us from, and thank you very much for your questions as well, we hope to see you at the poster session soon, and we look forward to your company again over the next 2 days. I'm Reedy Wyndham, and from all the team and myself, goodbye.